Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Laci Peterson. Laci Rocha was born on May 4, 1975, to Sharon and Dennis Rocha. When Laci and her older brother Brent were still young, their parents got divorced. After the divorce, Laci's mother married Ron, a dairy farmer, who became a significant father figure in her life. Ron helped raise Laci and played an important role in her upbringing. With her cheerful and outgoing personality, Laci was known for her bright smile and bubbly nature. She loved talking to people and was always eager to engage in conversations, which made her a natural attention seeker. She thrived in social situations and was very popular. Growing up on a dairy farm with her stepfather, Laci developed a strong connection with nature. She spent a lot of time exploring and enjoying the outdoors. One of her favorite activities was gardening with her mother, which brought them both a lot of joy and fulfillment. As a teenager, Laci attended Thomas Downey High School and was a cheerleader. Her outgoing and bubbly personality made her a perfect fit for this role. She became very popular at school and made a lasting impression as the ideal cheerleader. After graduating from high school, Laci went on to attend California Polytechnic University, where she studied ornamental horticulture. Her passion for plants and wildlife inspired her to specialize in this field. While at Cal Poly, Laci regularly visited her friend who worked at a restaurant in Morro Bay. That's where she met Scott Peterson, a co-worker of her friend. Laci was instantly attracted to Scott and soon found herself smitten. She decided to take the initiative and gave him her phone number. Scott quickly got in touch with Laci, and they instantly clicked during their first conversation. After some anticipation, Scott asked Laci out on their first date, a deep-sea fishing trip. Unfortunately, Laci got seasick during the outing. Despite the unfortunate start, Laci and Scott continued seeing each other, and their relationship became more serious over time. They eventually decided to live together. Before meeting Laci, Scott had ambitions of becoming a professional golfer, but as their relationship progressed, his priorities changed, and he opted to focus on a business career instead. In 1997, Laci graduated from California Polytechnic State University, followed by Scott's graduation the next year. This marked a significant turning point in their lives, filled with promise and potential. On August 9, 1997, the couple exchanged their wedding vows in Avila Valley, San Luis Obispo County, surrounded by a picturesque resort setting. They celebrated their love and commitment to each other. After getting married, Laci and Scott launched a new business venture by opening The Shack, a sports bar in San Luis Obispo, California. Although business was initially slow, the couple eventually saw a steady increase in customers, with weekends often being particularly busy. After several successful years, in 2000, Laci and Scott made the difficult decision to sell The Shack. Despite the bar providing a steady income, they decided it was time to explore new opportunities. Following careful consideration, they finalized the sale and relocated to Laci's hometown of Modesto, California. In Modesto, Laci and Scott bought a beautiful 3-bedroom, 2-bath home in a high-end neighborhood. Laci took on a part-time job as a substitute teacher, while Scott worked for a European fertilizer company. As a devoted and dedicated partner, Laci focused her time and energy on being the best wife possible for Scott, mastering cooking, cleaning, and being attentive, ensuring their home was always warm and welcoming. In 2002, the couple received wonderful news. They were expecting a baby. The due date was set for February 10, 2003, not 2023. Upon learning the baby's gender, they happily announced that Laci and Scott were having a boy. They finally chose the name Connor for their little bundle of joy on December 24, 2002. Scott said he left the house at 9:30 a.m. to go fishing at the Berkeley Marina. At that time, Laci had a lot of things planned, according to Scott. She was watching Martha Stewart on TV, getting ready to clean the floor, bake Christmas cookies, and walk their golden retriever Mackenzie at the park. However, around 10:30 a.m., One of their neighbors found Mackenzie wandering around outside their home. The neighbor took Mackenzie back to Scott and Laci's house and left her in the backyard. When Scott got back home that afternoon from fishing, he said the house was empty. Mackenzie was in the yard, but there was no sign of Laci. Her car was still parked in the driveway. Scott claimed that after he got home, he took a shower and washed his clothes, which had gotten dirty and wet from fishing. After Scott finished his shower on Christmas Eve, he realized Laci was missing. As he grew more worried, he decided to call Laci's mother and stepfather, Sharon and Ron. Unfortunately, neither of them had heard from Laci all day, and they were getting worried about her safety too. As time passed and Laci remained missing, Scott and Sharon decided to report her disappearance to the police around 6 p.m. They stressed to the police the urgency of finding Laci, given her 7-month pregnancy with their baby Connor. During questioning, the police asked Scott about his whereabouts and activities on the day his wife vanished. According to Scott, he went fishing at the Berkeley Marina, approximately 90 miles from their Modesto home. However, the police would later reveal that they suspected foul play in Laci's disappearance from the start of their investigation. Initially, the police did not treat Laci's case as suspicious, despite the family's concerns. As the search for Laci continued, her family publicly defended Scott. To outsiders, Scott and Laci appeared to be an ideal couple, making it difficult to imagine Scott capable of harming his pregnant wife. As the investigation into Laci's disappearance continued, the police became increasingly suspicious of Scott. Almost a month after Laci vanished, the police made a startling discovery about Scott Peterson. Their investigation revealed that he had had 2 extramarital affairs and a long-term relationship with a woman named Amber Frey while still married to Laci. Amber Frey got in touch with the police on December 30th, 2002, after finding out that Scott was a suspect in his wife's disappearance. She informed the police that she had been having an affair with Scott, who initially presented himself as a single man when they first met on November 20th, 2002. However, 2 weeks prior to Laci's disappearance, Scott confessed to Amber that he was a widower and that this Christmas would be his first one without his wife, which was a different story from what he initially told her. The police were shocked by this information and began to suspect that Scott may have already decided to murder his pregnant wife. To gather evidence against Scott, the police asked Amber to make a recorded phone call to him, hoping to capture a confession on tape. The police informed Laci's family about Scott's infidelity. It was not until they showed her a picture of Scott with Amber that Laci's mother, Sharon, finally accepted Scott's guilt in Laci's murder. Laci's family stopped supporting Scott in the search for her after learning of his affairs. The massive search effort involved multiple resources and over 900 volunteers. At a press conference, a police officer doubted she left voluntarily on December 24th. The media frenzy focused on the story of a devoted wife and daughter vanishing on Christmas Eve. After Laci disappeared on December 24, 2002, a $25,000 reward was initially offered for information leading to her safe return. As time passed with no leads, the reward was increased to $500,000 to raise awareness and gather more information. Posters of Laci were displayed prominently in Modesto, California, and a website was created by one of her friend's husbands to spread the news. Months later, on April 13, 2003, a couple walking their dog in the Richmond's Point Isabel Regional Shoreline Park made a horrifying discovery. They found the decomposing body of a male infant. The next day, another person found the body of a pregnant woman on the east side of the bay shore, about a mile away from where the baby was found. On April 18, 2003, DNA tests confirmed that the bodies were indeed Laci and her unborn son, Connor. Laci and Connor were laid to rest at Wood Cemetery. The Associated Press later discovered that the autopsy revealed disturbing details about Laci's body. She had suffered 2 cracked ribs, her upper torso had been emptied of internal organs, and her head and limbs were missing. The medical examiner concluded that the baby had died while still in Laci's womb and was expelled after her death. Furthermore, the autopsy found 1.5 loops of nylon tape around the baby's neck and a significant cut on its body. To investigate Laci's disappearance, agents from the FBI and the Modesto Police Department searched the residence of Scott and Laci. They discovered several intriguing clues, including a piece of hair found in Scott's pliers on his fishing boat. A DNA sample from the hair matched Laci. In addition to searching their home, the FBI thoroughly examined Scott's truck and warehouse, looking for any potential evidence linking him to Laci's disappearance. They also searched Scott's boat, where they found a homemade anchor. Scott claimed he made the anchor using a 90-pound bag of concrete to repair his driveway. However, the state believed that Scott had made 5 anchors, using 4 of them to weigh down Laci's body in the San Francisco Bay. Laci and her baby son Connor's bodies were found in San Francisco Bay. After this, Scott was arrested near a golf course. Notably, Scott's hair was bleached blonde, and his car was packed with $115,000, survival gear, camping equipment, 4 cell phones, and 2 driver's licenses. This evidence suggested he was preparing to flee, but his father claimed the license was borrowed to get a golf course discount, and the packed car was due to media scrutiny. Scott's trial started a year after his arrest in June 2004. In their opening arguments, the prosecution presented its case to the jury, claiming that they had evidence Scott murdered Laci because of his affair with Amber Frey. The prosecution highlighted Scott's suspicious behavior in the days leading up to and following Laci's disappearance, pointing out inconsistencies in his initial police statement. At first, Scott told police he was fishing, but later told others he was golfing. The prosecution also emphasized Scott's request to police about whether they had used cadaver dogs to search a park where Laci walked their dog, suggesting he was aware of a potential crime scene and trying to cover his tracks. In response, Scott's defense attorneys presented a strong counter-argument. They argued that just because Scott had a history of infidelity, it didn't necessarily make him guilty of Laci's murder. They claimed it was unlikely Scott would risk everything for someone he had only gone on 4 dates with. The defense also proposed that Laci's hair could have been found in Scott's boat due to a previous visit to the marina with him. During Scott's trial, 2 relatives of Laci's provided testimony and reported that Scott displayed no emotional response during the period when his pregnant wife was missing. A real estate agent also testified, stating that Scott approached her in January, 1 month after Laci's disappearance, attempting to sell the couple's home. Furthermore, a car salesman testified that Scott traded in Laci's vehicle after she vanished. The state regarded all of this as evidence of Scott's guilt. Amber Frey took the witness stand and discussed her affair with Scott. The jury listened to secretly recorded phone calls between Amber and Scott, including one made after Laci's disappearance in which Scott falsely claimed to be in Paris, when in actuality he was attending a vigil for his missing wife. A hydrologist testified that Laci's body could have been dumped where Scott claimed to be fishing. The defense argued there was no credible evidence linking Scott to the crime, suggesting someone kidnapped Laci, held her until she gave birth, then dumped both bodies in the bay. During Scott's trial, a juror was dismissed and replaced with an alternate due to misconduct. This juror had conducted unauthorized research on the case, violating legal procedures. Furthermore, the foreman also requested to be removed from the case, citing concerns about maintaining a fair and just trial. On November 12, 2004, a California jury found Scott guilty of 2 counts of murder. Specifically, he was convicted of first-degree murder for the killing of his wife Laci and second-degree murder for the killing of their unborn son Connor. Notably, Laci's murder was classified as first-degree murder with special circumstances due to the involvement of the fetus, making Scott eligible for the death penalty. After Scott's conviction for the murders, the trial entered its penalty phase, which focused on determining the appropriate punishment. The jury had to consider various factors, including Scott's criminal history, any circumstances that might increase his punishment, aggravating circumstances, and any circumstances that might reduce it, mitigating circumstances. The jury unanimously agreed that Scott should receive the death penalty. Following the jury's verdict, the judge reviewed the evidence and confirmed their decision. He noted that Laci's murder was particularly cruel, uncaring, heartless, and callous, which justified the death penalty. As is automatic in such cases, Scott's sentence was appealed, and his case was subsequently heard by the California Supreme Court in June 2020. During the appeal, Scott's defense team raised several arguments. They claimed that some potential jurors were improperly dismissed, that the trial judge should not have allowed 2 jurors to visit Scott's boat, and that the trial should have been moved to a different county due to concerns that many potential jurors had already made up their minds about Scott's guilt before the trial began. However, the state countered that there was no evidence to suggest any jurors were unfairly dismissed, and that none of the 12 jurors who decided Scott's fate had shown any bias. In August 2020, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld Scott's conviction but overturned his death sentence. In 2021, the judge resentenced Scott to life imprisonment without parole. Consequently, Scott was moved from San Quentin State Prison, where he had been on death row, to Mule Creek State Prison in Ione, California, as per the judge's order. President George W. Bush signed the Unborn Victims of Violence Act in 2004, with Laci's family present. The law, also known as Laci and Connor's Law, protects unborn children from violence, recognizing them as separate legal entities from their mothers and making it a crime to harm or kill them. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Angie Hausman. On November 18, 1993, Angie Hausman, a 9-year-old girl from St. Louis, Missouri, disappeared after getting off her school bus just a few hundred meters from her home. Angie, born on February 18, 1984, had never known her biological father, as he had left the family before she was born. When Angie was 1 year old, her mother married a man named Ronald, and they had a son together. Angie got along well with her stepfather and adored her little brother. Angie was an easygoing child who always sought to make friends with those around her. She lived in a quiet suburb of St. Louis and attended an elementary school located just over a mile from her home. She usually took a bus from the nearest stop, and her parents felt relatively safe letting her go there alone, as the stop was only a few hundred meters from their home. Angie typically walked to the bus stop with neighborhood kids after school, and they were watched by several parents from their windows along the way. On the day of her disappearance, Angie finished school around 3 p.m. and took the school bus to her stop with a few neighborhood kids. They walked together towards their homes, but the other children lived closer to the bus stop, leaving Angie alone halfway. When Angie didn't arrive home after about half an hour, her parents began to worry. They went out and walked along the route between their house and the bus stop, talking to other kids from the same school and neighbors who usually kept an eye on the children. However, no one had seen Angie. Angie's parents and their friends quickly initiated a search, scouring the area along the route from the bus stop to their home. As darkness fell, they decided to call the police. Officers immediately joined the search, considering the cold weather and the recent attempted abduction of an 11-year-old girl in a nearby area just 10 days prior. The police used K9 units, which picked up Angie's scent near the bus stop, but lost it roughly halfway to her house, suggesting that she may have gotten into a vehicle at that point. Helicopters with thermal sensors were also deployed, but they found no trace of the girl or her belongings. On the first day of the search, no clues were found. By the following morning, the police sought assistance from the media. The police department was inundated with over 300 calls, necessitating the hiring of more than 20 additional officers, including closely examining Angie's stepfather, who denied any involvement and consented to a lie detector test. They also found Angie's biological father, who had never had any contact with his daughter, but had been observed driving by their house multiple times, watching Angie play outdoors. The FBI became involved on the third day, and the police department allocated even more officers to the investigation, realizing that Angie must have encountered something horrible. She just couldn't have survived on the streets in such cold weather. At one point, the police received a lead about a possible suspect. Someone reported a strange man slowly driving a blue sedan in Angie's neighborhood. His description matched the account of a girl who had narrowly escaped an abduction just 10 days before Angie's disappearance. Investigators decided to create a composite sketch of this person. It was featured in the news, and volunteers distributed thousands of flyers, but the identity of this man remained unknown. Soon, the girl's disappearance made it to national television, attracting even more leads. Police diligently examined each one, but none brought them closer to finding Angie. Due to the heightened attention to this case, psychics quickly got involved, calling Angie's home and sharing their alleged visions. One of them claimed that the girl was alive and even specified a location where she was being held, a large national park 25 miles from Angie's home. However, detectives paid no attention to their words. A $10,000 reward was also offered for any information about Angie's whereabouts, leading to an increase in tips. During the investigation, detectives uncovered a pretty disturbing fact. A few days before her disappearance, Angie told her teacher that she was planning to go on a nature trip with her uncle. The catch was that there was no uncle, and her parents had no idea what their daughter meant by that. Investigators considered the possibility that Angie might have known her abductor prior to the incident and referred to him as her uncle in the conversation with her teacher. However, they didn't find anything about this mysterious man in the following days. Detectives were unable to make any headway in the case until November 27th, 9 days following Angie's disappearance, when a significant breakthrough occurred. A hunter contacted the police after discovering a human body in the woods upon arriving at the national park. The police were met with a gruesome and disturbing scene when they reached the location. They found the body of a girl, completely naked, tied to a tree with her head fully wrapped in tape, leaving only her nose exposed. Handcuffs bound her hands. In close proximity to the site, a bag was found containing items that quickly led the police to identify the body as Angie's. The bag held her personal belongings, including notebooks bearing her name. The body was handed over to medical examiners, revealing even more shocking details. As soon as they removed the tape from her head, experts found a piece of underwear in her mouth. They also determined that the girl had died just a few hours before the discovery, meaning she had been kept alive for 9 days and then taken to this location where she froze to death. Experts had concluded that the victim had suffered numerous injuries and had been sexually assaulted. Forensic analysts carefully examined all items found at the crime scene and managed to find a fingerprint on the tape used to wrap Angie's head. They tried to find matches in the database and among several suspects, but it led to no leads. After the discovery of the body, the police dedicated even more resources to the investigation. Local residents were shocked by such cruelty and feared for their children, escorting them everywhere, meeting them at bus stops, and not letting them out of their sight for a moment. Just a few days after Angie's discovery, their concerns heightened even further. On December 1st, a 10-year-old girl named Casey disappeared. She lived in another town only 10 miles from Angie's house. Casey had asked her mother if she could visit her friends who lived just a few hundred yards away, but she had never reached their house. Casey vanished on the way, and the police couldn't locate her. Detectives began to fear that they might have a serial killer on their hands. They didn't rule out the possibility that the same person was behind both abductions, but they had no evidence supporting this theory. 10 days later, Casey's body was found in St. Louis. She was wrapped in 2 bed sheets and covered with a pink curtain, with the cause of death being multiple severe blows to the head. Detectives couldn't find any clues that would lead them to the killer. Moreover, they started to doubt that the same person who killed Casey was responsible for Angie's death. The nature of these crimes was noticeably different, leading them to consider the possibility of dealing with two different murderers in the same month. Detectives identified the man who had attempted to abduct the girl a few days before Angie's disappearance. He turned out to be 37-year-old Gary, who often came to St. Louis for work. He was immediately checked for involvement in the two murders, but the man had a solid alibi. He wasn't in the city during the disappearances of Angie and Casey. Although, during the investigation, he admitted to assaulting 4 other girls and eventually received a 5-year prison sentence. In February of the following year, detectives had found a breakthrough when they discovered Casey's body. Tire tracks were found nearby, and their photos were handed over to experts who determined that the tracks were left by a pickup truck widely used by a popular car rental company. Armed with this information, detectives interviewed residents in Casey's neighborhood, asking if anyone had seen a pickup from this company, given that these vehicles were covered with vibrant brand logos that were easily distinguishable from others. The detectives got lucky. One woman told them that she had seen the pickup from this company near her neighbor's house about a week after Casey's disappearance. Police quickly discovered that there was a woman living with her partner and brother. She claimed that none of them had rented such a pickup and they had no connection to this case. But detectives didn't rush to believe her. They obtained a search warrant for the house and found blood traces belonging to Casey in the basement, along with the murder weapon. Further investigation revealed that the woman's brother, Thomas, had rented the pickup. Initially, he denied everything, but when confronted with the existing evidence, he finally confessed. According to his account, Casey had knocked on his door, wanting to invite his nephews to go to the street with her. He invited her into her house, took her to the basement, and attempted to assault her. When she screamed, he struck her with a heavy object and covered the body with bed sheets. After the murder, Thomas went to work, and upon his return, his sister informed him that she had seen the body in the basement. However, she added that she didn't want to know what happened and demanded to get rid of it as quickly as possible. Casey remained in the basement for a whole week because active searches were underway, and Thomas was afraid to move her. When things calmed down a bit, he rented the pickup, took the body to St. Louis, and left it there. Thomas was eventually sentenced to death, but he died in prison from illnesses several years later. In connection to Angie's case, he denied any involvement, leading detectives to conclude that these crimes were indeed unrelated. The investigation hit another standstill for many months, with fewer and fewer leads coming in. Several years after Angie's murder, detectives faced another challenge: the expiration of the monetary reward for information, raising concerns about a decline in public assistance. However, an unexpected turn came in 2001 when a businessman in the community donated $250,000 as a reward for information on Angie's case. This generous amount of money, one of the largest at the time, led to a massive influx of tips for the police. But unfortunately, all of these leads proved to be dead ends. This continued until 2001, when detectives received a call from a prison inmate named Corey Fox, who confessed to over 10 murders, including Angie Hausman's. Detectives rushed to speak with him, and Fox recounted how he and his friend abducted her from the street, keeping her captive in his house for several days. Initially, the criminals planned to demand a ransom, but concerns about potential identification led them to choose murder. To the surprise of detectives, Fox provided many accurate details, such as tying her to a tree, even specifying that his accomplice was using her underwear as a gag. However, discrepancies arose when questioned about how they restrained her hands. Fox claimed they used plastic handcuffs, whereas in reality, they used iron ones. Detectives also found out that Fox couldn't have committed some of the murders he confessed to. Police concluded that he likely fabricated parts of his confession, possibly drawing information from extensive news coverage on Angie Hausman's case. In the summer of 2002, another event reignited attention on Angie's case. In a different area of St. Louis, an unknown man abducted a 6-year-old girl from her home and killed her. Police initially considered the possible connection to Angie's case, but it turned out otherwise. The perpetrator was apprehended just a few hours later. It was a neighbor who confessed during interrogation. Several more years passed until 2007, when detectives decided to revisit the case. Reviewing the documents, they noticed a peculiar detail. Shortly after discovering Angie's body, police noticed a parked car nearby with a man named Roger Martin inside. When questioned about his presence, Roger claimed he came to the area for hunting. However, upon a brief inspection of his car, the police officer found no hunting gear. This led the new detective team to take a closer look at Roger, discovering his criminal record for offenses against children. Moreover, he had assaulted one of his victims near the location where Angie's body was found. Remarkably, all of these crimes occurred before Angie's death, and this information was in the database. But during that time, the police did not thoroughly investigate Roger, prompting the new detective team to start from scratch. Roger was called in for questioning. He denied any involvement in Angie's murder, insisting he was near the location by chance. Roger added that during the time the girl was left there, he was still at work, although the police couldn't confirm this alibi. Despite a 9-hour interrogation, detectives couldn't reach any conclusive results. They took Roger's fingerprints, comparing them with the one left on the tape from the victim's head. Experts determined they didn't match, leading to Roger's release. While the police refrained from ruling him out as a suspect, they lacked substantial evidence to hold him. There was no progress in the case until 2018, when the St. Louis Police Department formed a dedicated task force. The new detectives aimed to re-examine all existing evidence with significant advances in technology since '93, hoping to uncover new leads. The detectives focused on 3 key pieces of evidence: the handcuffs, tape from Angie's head, and her underwear used to silence her. Despite repeated attempts since '93, experts struggled to find the perpetrator's DNA on them. Undeterred, they decided to re-examine these items with modern technology. Firstly, they attempted to find DNA on the handcuffs, but it was quite challenging as they were almost entirely covered in the victim's blood. They then turned to the tape from Angie's head, encountering another issue. When they opened the box containing this evidence, they found that the tape had literally disintegrated over the years. Finally, they examined the underwear, despite having little hope for this particular evidence, as it had been in the victim's mouth for several hours, potentially erasing any foreign DNA. They pursued it as a last resort. Employing state-of-the-art technology, they meticulously inspected every inch of the underwear, and at last, there was a breakthrough. A tiny sample of unfamiliar DNA was discovered, sufficient for analysis. Experts confirmed the DNA belonged to a male, immediately uploading it to the FBI database. In such cases, it's pretty common not to find any matches, requiring additional efforts to identify the person. However, luck was on the detective's side this time. As soon as the DNA sample was uploaded, they received a full match. The DNA belonged to 58-year-old Earl Cox, who had been in prison since 2003. Cox had never come to the police radar regarding Angie's case, but his criminal history was substantial. Earl first landed behind bars during his military service in 1982 in Germany. He had a part-time job as a babysitter until 4 girls reported that he had sexually assaulted them. Earl received an 8-year prison sentence in the USA and was discharged from the Army. After serving only 3 years, he was released early and relocated to St. 4 years later, Earl was arrested again when 2 7-year-old girls accused him of sexual assault. Despite the charges being dropped due to insufficient evidence, his arrest violated the terms of his parole, leading to an additional year in prison. Upon his release in '92, he resettled in St. Louis, where his relatives lived. A year later, he seemingly abducted and killed Angie, but we'll delve into that shortly. In 2002, Earl faced another arrest for running a major anonymous internet platform where predators shared materials depicting child abuse. The FBI had been investigating him for a while, and Earl took the bait when an undercover agent posing as a 14-year-old girl contacted him. Earl expressed intentions to make her his slave, sent money for a bus ticket, and showed up at the agreed meeting place. Instead of a girl, Earl encountered armed FBI agents, resulting in his arrest. On his computer, they discovered 45,000 photos of child abuse, along with evidence that he was the mastermind behind the perverse platform. This information led to the arrest of 60 more individuals associated with the site, marking one of the country's largest operations against pedophiles. In 2003, Earl was sentenced to 10 years in prison, but when his term ended, a judge refused to release the offender, using a legal loophole allowing the detention of individuals deemed a serious threat to children. As a result, he remained behind bars, and in 2019, his DNA matched the sample from Angie Hausman's case. Detectives went to prison to speak with him. However, Earl denied his involvement and promptly asked for a lawyer. The police recognized that the man had little chance of winning the case in court, given the presence of his DNA, but they decided to try something else. Investigators reached out to Earl's lawyer, stating they would seek the death penalty for Angie's murder. However, if the perpetrator confessed, the prosecution would abandon the death penalty in favor of a life sentence. Apparently aware that he would likely lose the case, Earl agreed to the deal. Detectives returned to the prison, where he provided his version of events. It's worth noting that some parts of his story sounded outright implausible, but the crucial thing for investigators was the confession to the murder. Earl claimed that on November 18, 1993, he was driving through the area where his mother and sister lived. His car stalled in the middle of the road, and while he was trying to figure out what was wrong with it, a school bus pulled up and several kids got off. They all went into their houses, except for one girl, Angie. According to Earl, when she approached him, they had a brief chat, and he noticed she looked freezing. He offered her a ride in his car, and as he claimed, she agreed. He then took Angie to Burger King, fed her, and brought her to his home, where he sexually assaulted her for several days. After some time, he decided to get rid of Angie, took her to the location where her body would later be found, and tied her to a tree. Allegedly, she was still alive at that moment. Detectives doubted the truthfulness of certain parts of this story. Angie clearly couldn't agree to go anywhere with a stranger, especially considering she only had a short distance to walk home. Investigators also questioned the car breakdown in Earl's story. He claimed the car stalled, but as soon as Angie approached, the car surprisingly started again. More likely, the perpetrator noticed Angie and immediately decided to abduct her. He could have lured her into the car with some lies or even threats. It appeared much more realistic than Earl's version. Nevertheless, detectives obtained what they needed, the confession to the murder. In August 2020, he appeared before a judge who sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Unfortunately, Angie's mother did not live to see this moment. She passed away from cancer in 2016. Her husband, Ronald, told reporters that Earl should have been tried for 2 murders because he held him responsible for his wife's death. After losing her daughter, she lost all interest in life and essentially died. As for Earl, his story didn't end with the verdict. The prosecutor wanted to review the case of sexual abuse involving 2 7-year-old girls, for which the offender faced no consequences, serving just a year in prison for parole violation. Police reached out to one of his victims, now an adult, asking her to testify against Earl. The man, already destined to spend the rest of his life behind bars, admitted his guilt, and he was sentenced to an additional 10 years in prison. After the sentence was announced, his victim spoke in court. She expressed that despite Earl's heinous crime, she would lead a happy and fulfilling life while he rightly fades away in prison. When Manhattan resident and mother of 2, Sheila Danvey, was found deceased in her bathtub in December 2009, the police initially ruled her death an accident paid. However, about 6 months after the incident, suspicions led her family to exhume the woman's body. The subsequent autopsy revealed shocking new details, prompting the launch of a murder investigation. Sheila Danby was a New Yorker who owned a luxury apartment on Manhattan's Upper West Side. At time of her death, she was in the process of divorcing Rod Sin, and they were embroiled in a custody battle over their 2 children, 9-year-old Anna and 3-year-old Miles. The ex-husband resided next door in the same complex, and they saw each other periodically. Their relationship was very strained. People who knew Sheila described her as a loving and caring mother who always prioritized her children above all else. They noted her friendly and gentle nature, along with her outer and inner beauty. She was highly intelligent and accomplished in every respect. Colleagues regarded her as a professional in her business. She was a successful Wall Street investment banker with several $1 million to her name. The sudden and tragic death of Sheila came as a shock to everyone who knew her. She had no known enemies at work or in her personal life at that time. She was single and not involved in any romantic relationships. Sheila devoted herself wholeheartedly to raising her children, which was her top priority. On the morning of that tragic day, December 31st, 2009, Sheila's daughter Anna woke up first and went to the bathroom. There she encountered a horrific scene. Her mother's body floating face down in the bathtub, with water tinged red with blood. Additionally, the closet door directly above the bathtub had been ripped off its hinges. Shocked and frightened, Anna ran out of the bathroom and immediately dialed her father's number, reporting that something terrible had happened to her mom. A man living nearby quickly rushed to the apartment and, upon entering the bathroom, found his former wife unconscious. This account encapsulates the professional background and personal tragedy surrounding Sheila Danby's untimely demise that spurred further inquiries into what truly transpired on that fateful day. Rod notified 911, and emergency services were dispatched to the address. Meanwhile, the man took her body from the bathtub, covered her with a blanket, and tried to give her CPR as instructed by the operator. He hoped to resuscitate the woman, but it didn't work. By then, medics had already arrived. When they entered the apartment, they found him still in the bathtub, not giving up on trying to save her. Medics checked her pulse. There was none. The body was cold. They pronounced the death of a 47-year-old woman as they observed signs of rigor mortis, determining that she had died about an hour earlier. Rod was grief-stricken. Crying with his children, he was deeply worried about what had happened. The medics had to sedate him because he was so distressed. Upon arriving at the scene, police officers examined the bathtub closely. They noticed a broken cabinet door and presumed it was related to the incident. It appeared that while reaching for something in the cabinet, she slipped and fell, hitting her head on the tub. This caused her to lose consciousness and drown. The head injury caused significant bleeding, explaining the red color of the water. Everything indicated an accident. There were no signs of forced entry or anything missing from the home. Given these factors, the case was closed as an accident. Due to their religious beliefs, Sheila's family requested no autopsy be performed once her death was ruled accidental. She was subsequently buried. However, following her funeral, doubts began to emerge among her loved ones about the nature of her sudden demise. Sheila's relatives highlighted inconsistencies. She never took baths with water due to time constraints and always showered instead, raising questions about why she would be found in a full bathtub. Additionally, they recalled she had undergone a keratin hair treatment just a day before her death, something that required keeping her hair dry for 3 days afterward. Given these circumstances, and considering how diligent Sheila usually was about following such rules, her loved ones began suspecting that her death might not have been an unfortunate accident. They wondered if foul play could have somehow been responsible for this tragedy. Sheila was known to avoid bathing in a bathtub. It went against her habits and couldn't be true. The suspicions grew so strong that her relatives asked the police to start an investigation into her death and requested that her body be exhumed. Initially, the police did not take these requests seriously because everything seemed obvious. A woman fell in the bathtub, hit her head, and died. However, the relatives managed to convince detectives to conduct an autopsy on Sheila's body. Her body was exhumed in April 2010 and sent for autopsy. This is when it was discovered that Sheila had been strangled before being placed in the bathtub. The forensic expert determined that she had been strangled with such force that her hyoid bone was broken and several ribs were also fractured. The head trauma wasn't serious and couldn't have caused her death. It appeared that Sheila died as a result of a violent struggle while being choked. The perpetrator might have had martial arts training and performed the chokehold with precision. Additionally, a forensic medical examiner who reviewed photos of the deceased noted fresh bruises on her arms and severe bruising around her eyes. In light of these new findings, law enforcement officials had no choice but to launch an investigation into Sheila's murder. The investigation was complicated by the fact that several months had passed since the tragedy, and no one initially suspected homicide, leaving no evidence at the scene. Detectives only had a few photos taken by officers who arrived for the initial report. Investigators believed that over those months, all traces would have likely been destroyed during bathroom cleanups. Nevertheless, despite significant doubts, they couldn't ignore this path forward. Upon arriving at the deceased woman's apartment for an inspection, police officers discovered that her children and husband resided there. The husband courteously permitted the detectives to enter and examine the premises. The CSIs proceeded to the bathroom, finding nothing of interest as expected. Rod mentioned that after his wife's death, the bathroom was meticulously cleaned multiple times with a cleaning agent, erasing all traces of blood. This thorough cleaning aimed to spare their children from distressing memories associated with their mother. The man had received authorization from police officers present on the day of the death to perform this cleaning. There were no witnesses to the crime. Only young children were in the apartment at the time. They were interviewed, but reported neither seeing nor hearing anything suspicious. Additionally, investigators observed no signs of forced entry into the house, suggesting that either the perpetrator possessed a key or was willingly let inside by someone. It was likely that the woman knew her killer, leading detectives to believe it was someone familiar to her. After speaking with her loved ones, they learned that Sheila had no enemies or ill-wishers, but had endured conflicts with her ex-husband over divorce and child custody matters. Sheila and Rod first met in 1998 while working on Wall Street. Sheila was already a successful professional then, serving as a vice president at a major financial company, while Rod was a novice investment trader getting started in the field. Despite this difference in experience, they quickly fell in love and began an intense romance, marrying just months later. Their swift marriage surprised many. Some friends even advised Sheila to take her time and assess her feelings before committing to someone new in her life. They worried he might not have genuine intentions, seeing how rapidly he captured her heart. However, blinded by love, Sheila ignored these concerns. The newlyweds moved into Sheila's luxurious apartment in New York's upscale Upper West Side neighborhood near Central Park. Before long, they welcomed a daughter named Anna into their lives. Though motherhood occupied much of Sheila's time initially, she soon returned to work and hired a nanny to assist with childcare duties. Sheila advanced to a fruitful career and eventually ran a company. Meanwhile, Rod struggled to find success in this endeavor despite his wife's support. Ultimately, he abandoned the job and turned his attention to pursuing his passions. Rod was passionate about martial arts, earning a black belt and actively participating in competitions. He convinced his wife that his future lay in sports, where he believed he could excel and become a coach. She believed him. However, Rod's focus shifted again, first to backgammon, then to various other hobbies that he changed frequently. His behavior exhibited signs of immaturity throughout this period, as he relied heavily on his wife for support and occasionally solicited funds from his parents. The couple welcomed a second child, a son. On the surface, they appeared content. However, Rod concealed a double life from his wife. In addition to experimenting with numerous hobbies, Rod engaged in extramarital affairs. Initially, he was involved with one woman, then two, but eventually expanded these activities. His address book contained around 20 women with whom he regularly met. Rod even created a schedule on his computer to manage these appointments without confusion. He connected with new acquaintances online and didn't shy away from meeting women of questionable character. Rod portrayed himself as a successful banker from Wall Street, attracting attention from women who aspired to secure such a promising partner. At home, however, he treated his wife poorly, often with insult and humiliation, reducing her to tears. But deception has its limits. Rod's deceit was ultimately uncovered by his own wife. Suspecting infidelity for some time, she hired a private detective who collected comprehensive evidence against him. The investigation revealed that Rod was simultaneously communicating online with 860 women. Confronted with the evidence, Rod did not deny it. He admitted that monogamy wasn't something he could uphold despite claiming love for her and seeing her as suitable for their shared life. He proposed an open relationship, a suggestion met with firm refusal from his wife, leading her to the conclusion that she could no longer endure his behavior. Exhausted by his antics and deceptions, she decided to file for divorce. In April 2009, the woman decided to kick her husband, Kay, out of their apartment, but felt pity and rented him a place not far from home. She thought he had nowhere else to go. Later, she regretted that decision deeply. After moving out, Rod realized that a divorce would mean losing all his assets as well as the lavish lifestyle he was accustomed to. He knew that without money, his new girlfriends would lose interest in him. Therefore, he began threatening Sheila that he would take her children away and pursue her relentlessly if they divorced. Sheila wanted to avoid trouble and contemplated how to resolve the problem with her ex-husband. She offered him a $250,000 payoff to make him go away. However, Rod rejected the offer and demanded more money along with full custody of their children. He intentionally threatened and manipulated Sheila by exploiting what mattered most to her, her children, despite knowing that he had no genuine interest in them. Sheila's lawyer advised against negotiating with him, confident that the evidence would sway the court in their favor. Rod's anger only grew due to Sheila's refusal to yield. He took drastic measures by informing her workplace that she was taking illegal substances. Even though everyone knew this was untrue, Sheila's supervisor couldn't ignore it and sent her for testing, which proved she was clean. When this plan failed, Rod reported his wife to the tax office, but even this investigation showed she was compliant with the law. Determined to cause more trouble, he began using his own set of keys to enter Sheila's apartment and create disturbances. Rod then falsely accused Sheila of molesting their 3-year-old son. The boy was referred to a child psychologist who confirmed nothing inappropriate had occurred. All this turmoil pushed Sheila towards a nervous breakdown due to the relentless problems caused by her ex-husband. In court, however, her lawyer successfully found Rod guilty of slander, and consequently, he was banned from communicating with both his children and his wife. The wife obtained a restraining order against Rod just a couple of days prior to her death. She communicated with her lawyer, expressing her intent to modify her will. She aimed to exclude her ex-husband, who was slated to receive $4 million. Instead, she wished to leave her entire fortune to her children. The lawyer agreed to implement the necessary changes and scheduled an appointment for the woman to sign the updated documents on January 1st. However, Sheila passed away before she had the chance to do so, which raised suspicions. The relatives found Sheila's sudden death peculiar and linked it with Rod's unusual conduct. They asserted that Sheila was deeply fearful of him. The nanny reported hearing Rod verbally abuse and threaten his spouse frequently. On one occasion, she even witnessed him push Sheila, causing her to fall. This led the nanny to fear how abusive he might have been in private. Investigators began suspecting Rod as well, since he appeared to have a clear motive. He seemed aware that Sheila intended to amend her will, which would remove him as a beneficiary. Consequently, he had a substantial financial incentive. benefiting both from an inheritance and a sizable $1 million life insurance policy on Sheila. In addition, detectives knew Rod possessed a key to his ex-wife's apartment, thus enabling him easy access. It was possible for him to commit the crime without obstacles and leave undetected. The way Rod allegedly left their young children alone with their deceased mother struck detectives as incredibly insensitive. This harrowing experience severely impacted Sheila's daughter, who required long-term psychological counseling due to the trauma. Despite these strong suspicions and precautions taken by investigators regarding Rod's potential involvement in Sheila's death, there was no direct evidence, such as DNA or fingerprints, linking him conclusively to the crime. Because of this lack of concrete evidence, the case remained contentious in terms of legal proceedings. Hence, police officers were reluctant to arrest or charge him formally. The investigation continued, and during this period, her insurance and inheritance were suspended. A new custody trial for the deceased's children began as well. Rod sought custody to gain access to his wife's finances through the children. However, her parents strongly opposed this because they believed Rod was at fault for their daughter's death. Additionally, Shell's words revealed that Rod disliked children, mistreated them, and frequently beat them. This was corroborated by the children during the trial. Even his own parents testified against him, accusing him of abusing the children and stealing $80,000 from them. Consequently, custody of the children was awarded to the parents of the deceased. In the meantime, Rod found himself without support and for the first time had to fend for himself. Lacking any means of livelihood, he secured a job as a debt collector. His aggressive tactics instilled fear in debtors who lodged complaints against him. Ultimately, his career in debt collection did not flourish, and he was terminated from his position. As time passed, the police struggled to find solid evidence against Rod. This case might have remained unresolved had one of Rod's former lovers not come forward in 2015. The woman finally decided to inform the police that Rod had confessed to her about murdering his wife. According to her, Rod's greed for his wife's money drove him to commit the act. He showed no interest in the children, except as a means to gain financial benefit through custody. Additionally, she provided shockingly new information. Rod had planned to kill his late wife's parents as well, and disguise their deaths as accidental events in order to regain custody and access his deceased wife's money. However, all his plans unraveled one by one. At one point, he even considered involving his daughter, who was a teenager at that time. In the realization of the plan, he tried to convince her that charges of harassment should be brought against her grandfather. But the girl categorically refused to participate in this. To prove her words, the former mistress presented the police with voice messages sent to her from Rod's cell phone. Now the police had new evidence. Based on the testimony of his mistress and these reports, Rod was arrested and charged with the murder of his wife in November 2015. This news came as a blow to Rod. He was confident of his impunity and planned to get away with murdering his wife, taking all her millions with him. The trial began in 2019, during which Rod denied all the allegations against him. He denied planning the murder, being in his wife's apartment that morning, killing her, and planning to kill her parents to get close to the money. On the prosecution side, there were numerous witnesses who spoke about Rod's abuse of his wife and children, as well as his affairs on the left. They discussed his intentions to gain access to all of his wife's money and control over financial matters in the event of a divorce. According to the prosecutor, Rod was motivated by money to get rid of his wife. He had a key to the apartment and knew how to perform a chokehold, which was used to kill her Sheila. Though there was no direct evidence against him in this case, there was enough circumstantial proof. A mistress appeared at trial and testified against Rod. This finally convinced the jury that he was guilty. Rod's children encouraged them to ask the court not to send their father to prison, given they had already lost one parent and did not want to lose another. The 12-year-old son spoke at trial, and although the 18-year-old daughter was absent, she relayed a plea asking for mercy for their father. However, These requests did not sway the jury. They found him guilty. Rod was sentenced to life in prison with a possibility of parole after 25 years. Mindy Morgenstern, 22, was a senior at Valley City State University, but lived in an off-campus apartment. On September 13, 2006, her friend Tony Bauman went to her place after Mindy had not answered the phone all day. Tony knocked on the door, but no one answered. The door was unlocked, so she decided to go inside. She wasn't ready for what she had to face. Mindy was born on April 29, 1984 in Bogota, Colombia. She and her sister became adoptive children of Eunice and Larry Morgenstern, farmers from New Salem, North Dakota, USA. Larry and Eunice already had one daughter, Rebecca, but they always dreamed of a big family. First, they adopted a boy named Michael, and then 10 years later, they adopted a girl from Colombia named April. When Larry and Eunice discovered that April had a younger sister, Mindy, they adopted her too. Thus, Eunice and Larry had 4 children, 3 of whom were adopted. Mindy was their youngest child. Life on the farm was perfect for her. She loved to ride horses and play basketball. She helped her parents on the farm and even drove a tractor herself. After graduating high school, Mindy moved from New Salem to Valley City and immersed herself in student life. Being an outgoing and cheerful person, she quickly made many new friends. Mindy combined her studies and working as a waitress at a local restaurant. It seemed like the best years of her life were ahead of her, but all her plans and dreams got ruined. It was rather unusual for Mindy Morgenstern not to answer her cell phone or call her friends back. But that's what precisely happened on September 13, 2006. That's why her friends Tony Bauman and Danielle Holmstrom decided to check on her and went to her apartment. When they stopped on the other side of the street from her apartment, they saw Mindy's car in the parking lot. Danielle stayed in the car, and Tony went to Mindy's apartment on the 2nd floor. She knocked on the door, but no one answered. The door was unlocked, so Tony decided to go inside and look around. It was dark. After taking a few steps, Tony saw something lying on the floor. When she turned on the light, she realized it was the dead body of Mindy. She had noticeable injuries on her neck. Tony was shocked. She ran outside and called Danielle, who was sitting in the car. The two of them entered the apartment. They were confused. There were knife wounds on Mindy's neck and an empty bottle of cleaning agent next to her. Its smell was all over Mindy's apartment. Danielle called 911 and reported the discovery of her friend's body. Hearing the noise, a man who lived on the same floor decided to check what was happening there. He walked up to Mindy, put his hand on her wrist, and after a few seconds said, "I'm sorry, but your friend is dead." Soon after, the police arrived at the scene. Upon entering Mindy's apartment, the detectives immediately noticed the pungent smell of the cleaning agent. Mindy's body was lying across the living room. She had a belt wrapped around her neck and a broken knife sticking out of it. Its handle was lying next to her. Detectives concluded that the person who did this used a cleaning agent to try to destroy evidence, but fortunately, some evidence remained. Forensic experts found skin particles under the nails of Mindy's left hand. Mindy resisted and scratched the person who attacked her. Trying to determine what was the motive for the attack on Mindy, investigators immediately ruled out the version of a robbery that had gone bad. She had her purse in her right hand. Next to it was her phone and wallet with some cash, but whoever did it didn't take the money. Mindy's jewelry and other items that could be of interest to a robber remained untouched too. There was also a basket of clean laundry next to the body, and it looked as if someone had attacked Mindy the moment she entered the apartment with the laundry. There were no signs of forced entry on the front door. It could mean that the person who attacked Mindy either knew her or entered the apartment right after her. The next day, the detectives had to do the most complicated part of their job: inform the Morgenstern family that Mindy was dead. The news was heartbreaking for her parents, brother, and sisters. The family members didn't know anyone who might want to harm Mindy. She was friendly with everyone. Moreover, no one among her friends had problems with the law. Mindy's friends, Tony Bauman and Danielle Holmstrom, told investigators they were not the only ones in the apartment. A man who lived on the same floor came to Mindy's apartment to the sound of their screams. He checked Mindy's pulse and said she was dead. When investigators talked to the man, he said he checked her pulse with the back of his hand so as not to leave his fingerprints on Mindy's wrist. It seemed strange to the investigators. This man's name was Robert Linz. He had several scratches on his hands, which made him a suspect in this case. The police took him to the station to ask some questions, and the number of those questions increased when they checked Robert Linz's background and found that he had problems with the law. They asked him about the scratches on his hands, and he said he had injured himself at work. According to him, he often had scratches on his hands because he worked with steel. When asked how he spent the previous day, he replied that he had been at work since 7 a.m. and returned home at about 5:30 p.m. The investigators contacted his employer, and the latter confirmed it. He also confirmed that his employees often had scratches on their hands due to the job specifics. Although his alibi checked out, investigators were not ready to exclude Robert Linz from the list of suspects. They asked him to provide a DNA sample, and he agreed. The police sent the sample to the lab for comparison with the one found under Mindy's fingernails. The police interviewed all of Mindy's friends, but it didn't bring any results. Everyone said that Mindy had no conflicts with anyone. While waiting for the DNA results, the investigators interviewed her other neighbors. One of those who lived in the same building as Mindy was a corrections officer from the Barnes County Jail, Mo Gibbs. Gibbs knew the investigators involved in the case. They decided to talk to him, hoping he had seen or heard something. After all, being a corrections officer, he probably paid attention to things that other people didn't notice or considered unimportant. Mo married a girl with a child, and they all lived in the apartment next door. He came to the police station with a child. Therefore, one of the officers kept the child busy so that Mo could answer all questions without interference. The investigators said they wanted to talk with everyone who lived in the same building as Mindy. Mo Gibbs said that he served in the Navy from 1990 to 1999, but then he was fired for assault and served a prison sentence. However, he had no more law problems after becoming a free man again. Before becoming a corrections officer, he worked as a college guard. He allegedly had a night shift the day before Mindy died. In the morning, he returned home and started loading boxes into the car because he, his wife, and his stepdaughter were moving to another apartment. Mo said he didn't see or hear anything unusual. However, there was one thing that caught his attention, and it was the strong smell of the cleaning agent. But he didn't bother to check where the smell came from because he was busy moving. Mo had scratches on his hands. He said he had injured himself while carrying the boxes. When the police asked Mo if he had ever been to Mimby Morgenstern's apartment, the man stated that he had been there once when he helped Mimby carry a laundry basket to her apartment. Investigators asked Mo Gibbs to provide a sample of his DNA for comparison, and he agreed without much hesitation. They let him go after taking his DNA sample. Investigators wanted to talk to everyone who knew Mindy well. They went to the restaurant where she worked and interviewed her colleagues. They found out that there was a visitor who made Mindy nervous. He lived in a trailer near the restaurant and went there almost daily. He was acting strangely, and Mindy said she felt uncomfortable around him. This man's name was Ralph, and the police decided to question him. He denied any connection to Mindy's death, saying he didn't know who she was at all. According to him, he never quarreled with anyone in that restaurant. Ralph did not have a reliable alibi, but he provided a sample of his DNA, which the police also sent to the laboratory for comparative analysis. Next, the investigators decided to chat with Mindy's boyfriend, Jordan Raynham. He, like Mindy, came from a local farming family, and their relationship lasted more than a year. They went to the same church, and that's where they met. Jordan had no problems with the law and had a good reputation in the city. Jordan seemed devoted to Mindy. He often took her home to spend time with his family. However, Mindy's parents told investigators that sometimes Jordan came to their farm unannounced and asked Mindy to come with him. It seemed like he was jealous. Yet Eunice and Larry did not believe that he could harm their daughter. The police asked Jordan to come to the station. The latter showed up there without delay. He was trying to help the investigators and answered the questions frankly. He said he saw Mimby the day before her death. They went shopping and were at a video rental shop. The next day, Mimby called him at 10:45 a.m. That was the day she died. They only talked once that day. And that was unusual for Mimby. She usually called Jordan 10 times a day, but this time she neither called nor answered. He thought she was busy and would call him back later, but she didn't. Jordan also told the police about his whereabouts at the time of Mindy's death. He allegedly worked on the family farm at that time. Investigators asked Jordan to provide a DNA sample and take a polygraph test. He agreed. During the polygraph test, Jordan was worried and his results were inconclusive. The police let Jordan go, sent his DNA sample to the lab, and started checking his alibi. But Jordan wasn't the only significant person in Mimby's life. Another potential suspect was Kyle Kuznia, Mimby's ex-boyfriend. They broke up more than a year before Mindy's death. However, there was something strange that happened after their breakup. Kyle Kuznia was the love of her life. They connected right away. Kyle met Mindy when she was a freshman. They had been dating for 2.5 years, and Kyle often visited the farm of Mindy's parents. Her family loved him and treated him like their son. Mimby loved him very much. She thought she would marry him one day, but unfortunately for Mindy, there was no wedding. Kyle told investigators the story of his life with Mindy. He told how they met and that they immediately felt attracted to each other. The relationship lasted 2.5 years, and Kyle described it as ups and downs. They started to quarrel often. Kyle finished his studies at the university and needed to move on. He moved to another place, about an hour's drive from Valley City. Mimby was worried Kyle would find another girl. Being in a long-distance relationship is a challenge. Therefore, according to Kyle, he decided to end it. They broke up, but Mimby tried to do everything she could to be with him. She wanted him back. Kyle told investigators he had met another girl and stopped communicating with Mimby after they broke up. But there was one night when Mimby came to his house to talk. It was about 7 months before she died. Allegedly, Kyle told her to leave. He had nothing to say to her. Mimby got upset and left, and they haven't spoken to each other since. But sitting in the interrogation room a few days after her death, Kyle seemed to regret his behavior. He told them that Mimby had been in touch with his father, Rodney Kuznia, and it was very, very strange. Mimby's friends said Kyle's father called her several times a day. Sometimes it was just a few calls a week. Kyle stated that in his opinion, his father was attached to Mindy too much. At some point, he even asked his father to stop communicating with his ex-girlfriend. Kyle then mentioned that his mother found out about all these calls and was very upset. She told Rodney that it was wrong. After all, he was married. The Kuznia family genuinely liked Mindy. For her, communicating with Rodney was probably a way to keep some connection with Kyle. The police checked Mindy's voicemail and found something strange there. There was a voicemail message from Rodney Kuznia left after Mindy's death, in which he cried and said he was sorry this happened. The police found such a close relationship between Rodney and Mindy strange. Thus, they called him in for questioning. The first question they asked Rodney was the most obvious one. Why was he so attached to his son's 22-year-old ex-girlfriend? Rodney agreed that it was rather strange. According to him, he became attached to Mindy when she was dating Kyle. Rodney liked her, and she reminded him of his wife when she was young. At first, he and Mindy used to talk about Kyle. She always mentioned his son's name, but soon they started talking and texting on other topics. They didn't stop even after his wife found out about it. Rodney said he and Mimby sometimes talked 20 times a week. He claimed that most of the time, Mimby called him herself. Rodney said Mimby was like a daughter to him. When he heard the terrible news about what had happened to her, he was shocked. He just wanted to talk to Mimby one last time, so he left a message on her voicemail. For investigators, these emotional voicemails didn't make Rodney any less suspicious. It was probably the other way around. Although investigators did not believe that Mindy had a romantic relationship with her ex-boyfriend's father, it was possible that he became dangerously obsessed with her. Rodney provided the police with his DNA. They asked him again and again about his whereabouts that day. He said he worked on the farm with his two sons from 7:30 a.m. until evening. Rodney's family confirmed his alibi, and investigators released him. They sent the sample of his DNA to the lab for comparison with the skin particles found under Mindy's fingernails. While the police were searching for the person responsible for Mindy's death, the residents of Valley City started to worry about their safety. Many were afraid to go outside, knowing that the one who took Mindy's life was still at large. Mindy's funeral was 6 days after her death. The coffin was placed in the school's gym, as the church would not accommodate everyone who wanted to say goodbye to her. The police, dressed in civilian clothes, also attended the funeral ceremony. They were supposed to keep an eye on everyone because they thought the person who took Mindy's life would also be there. The police instructed people to take photos and videos of everyone to see if anyone would behave strangely at the funeral, but this tactic did not bring results. The police had run out of suspects, and therefore, all that was left to do was wait for the results of the DNA tests of all the suspects. However, they discovered some interesting information even before the DNA results. It happened after the experts analyzed the DNA found under Mindy's fingernails and entered it into the federal database. 2 years before Mindy's death, someone attacked a woman in Fargo, North Dakota, 75 miles from Valley City. The person who attacked her forced her to make contact with him. I'm going to call what happened by that word, but I think you all know what I'm talking about. So, the police had a DNA sample of the suspect, but this case remained unsolved. At that time, there was no information about this person in the database. Now, it turned out that the one who took Mindy's life and the one who attacked the woman in Fargo were the same person. It meant that this person was not going to stop. The police needed to find him before someone else got hurt by his actions. They didn't have the person's name, but the Fargo case could push forward the investigation of Mindy's death and provide new leads. The police investigating the case of Mindy Morgenstern met with a woman from Fargo to try to find out from her any details about the man who attacked her. She was only 22 years old at the time, and she planned to become a teacher. One evening, she was hanging out with friends. They went to a bar, talked, had fun, and drank alcohol. She told her friends she wanted to go to the bathroom. That was the last thing she remembered. When she regained consciousness, she found herself pinned to a mattress in an unfamiliar apartment. She was lying on her stomach, and a man she had never seen before was on top of her. He put his hand over her mouth so she couldn't scream. She tried to resist, but the man was twice her size. She thought it was the end of her, but this man let her go. She was barefoot, her clothes were messy, and her purse was missing. She went to the police and described the man who attacked her as a muscular African American, over 6 feet tall and weighing over 200 pounds. They couldn't track this man down, but they had a sample of his DNA. The Fargo police entered this DNA into the federal database and waited. But 2 years have passed, and this case remained unsolved. But now it was evident that this man had committed a new attack, but this time with a fatal ending. Investigating the case of Mindy Morgenstern, the police collected several DNA samples. The lab has been working overtime to process these samples. After conducting a thorough analysis, the experts contacted the investigators and reported they found a match. The one who took Mindy's life was one of the men who provided their sample voluntarily. It wasn't Mindy's ex-boyfriend Kyle or his father Rodney who aroused a lot of suspicion. The skin found under Mindy Morgenstern's fingernails belonged to 34-year-old Mo Gibbs, a corrections officer at the Barnes County Jail. Mo has come a long way from his early life as a member of the Crips gang in Central California to serving in the U.S. Navy. He was married and had children. He lived in Fargo, but after the divorce, he moved to Valley City and worked as a college guard before getting a job at Barnes County Jail. Since he worked in law enforcement, he was familiar with the investigators involved in Mindy's case. He seemed like a good guy. Therefore, everyone was surprised that the DNA sample under Mindy's fingernails belonged to Mo Gibbs. The investigators decided to lure Gibbs to the police station. They called him and said they wanted to ask him some additional questions. He was under covert surveillance in case he decided to run away. But he showed up at the police station at the appointed time. Before informing him that they found his DNA under Mindy's fingernails, the police offered Gibbs to take a polygraph test. He agreed and answered all the questions. But there were some signs of lying on his part. Gibbs stated he had nothing to do with Mindy's death. After learning about the DNA match, he remained calm and claimed he wasn't the one who took Mindy's life. When the police told him that his DNA linked him to the Fargo case, he grinned but said nothing. The evidence obtained was enough to arrest him. Mo Gibbs was handcuffed and formally charged with taking the life of Mindy Morgenstern. They then subsequently charged him in the Fargo case. After news about his arrest went public, 5 female prisoners reported that Mo Gibbs had forced them into intimacy for several months. It all happened when Gibbs was on duty. Thus, the police charged him with 6 more counts. It seems rather strange that a man who served a prison sentence was first hired as a college guard and then as a corrections officer at the Barnes County Jail. But there's an explanation for this. None of Mo Gibbs's employers suspected that this was not his birth-given name. He changed his name at some point. Before becoming Mo Gibbs, he was Glenn Dale Morgan Jr. When he was in the Navy, he was involved in a drive-by shooting and spent more than 5 years in prison. During the trial, Gibbs's lawyers came up with the theory that his DNA ended up under Mindy's fingernails because she touched the same door handle as Mo. According to the defense, Mindy's boyfriend, Jordan Raynham, was the one who could have harmed Mindy. Gibbs pleaded guilty to all charges except those related to Mindy's death. Neither his fingerprints nor DNA were on the knife that injured Mindy. But prosecutors explained this by saying the cleaning agent had destroyed all traces. The prosecution believed that Gibbs entered Mindy's apartment right after her to force her into intimacy. She started to resist, and he lost his temper and took her life. To destroy the evidence, he doused everything with the cleaning agent. Gibbs stated that he would not have voluntarily provided his DNA sample if he had been the one who took Mindy's life. On July 12, 2007, the jury failed to reach a unanimous decision. Therefore, there was a new trial that took place 4 months later. This time, the prosecutors have prepared better. They involved several DNA experts to refute the lawyer's claim that Gibbs's DNA ended up under Mindy's fingernails because she touched the same door handle as him. At the trial, experts testified that such an amount of DNA could have gotten under Mindy's nails only during a vigorous physical contact. Gibbs's cellmate also testified at the trial. He said that Mo confessed to him that he had taken Mindy's life. Moreover, he said he would do it again if he had the opportunity. After 27 hours of deliberation, the jury found Mo Gibbs guilty on November 20, 2007. When asked whether he had anything to say before sentencing, Gibbs, 35, maintained his innocence and told Judge John Paulson, "My heart, my prayers go out to the Morgenstern family. This is terrible, and it never should have happened, and I apologize that it happened." The judge, however, said the evidence was overwhelming that Gibbs had strangled and stabbed Mindy in the neck and then poured Pine Sol cleaning fluid on her face and torso. He denied Gibbs's request for a new trial. The court sentenced him to life in prison without parole for taking the life of Mindy, plus 12 years for assaulting a woman in Fargo, and another 15 years on other charges. Mindy Morgenstern's mother, Eunice, said a few words to Gibbs after the sentencing. She looked at Gibbs and said, "Mr. Gibbs, I forgive you publicly here. I also want you to know that I won't forget what you did to Mindy." She ended her comments by telling Gibbs, "My heart goes out to his family and children." Gibbs said, "Thank you." Gibbs remains incarcerated at the North Dakota State Penitentiary in Bismarck. Escaped to death. In 2003, this high-profile story shook the whole of Brazil. and was widely covered by the international media. Hundreds of law enforcers, rescuers, and volunteers from among those who cared about the story were searching for the young couple who disappeared in the forests of Embu-Guasu province. They had hoped to find them alive, but unfortunately those hopes were not realized, and the last days of the young people turned into a real nightmare. But grief-stricken members of the families of the missing ahead awaited another ordeal when the main criminal, rapist, torturer, and brutal killer was not punished, moreover, found himself in better conditions than he lived before. Who are Liana Friedenbach and Felipe Café? Liana Bay Friedenbach was born in Sao Paulo in May 1987. The girl was the eldest of two children at her parents. She grew up in a fairly well-known and wealthy family. The head of the family, Henry Friedenbach, was a successful lawyer and a very respected man in the city. Felipe Silva Café was also a native of Sao Paulo, where he was born in July 1984. But he was brought up in a rather modest, large family. From childhood used to work part-time, tried to provide for himself independently, and help his relatives. Young people met as school children. Between them, there was a friendship, which grew into mutual sympathy and the first youthful love, but they had to hide it in every possible way. It is worth noting that Liana's parents were religious people. They brought up their daughter in strictness. She attended Sunday school from an early age and regularly went to church. Father and mother were categorically against her romantic relationships at such a young age. In addition, social inequality also played a significant role in this matter, because the girl, as I have already said, was from a wealthy family, and her chosen one was poor. But the prohibitions of parents did not force the young people to part. They simply began to hide their affair, secretly arranging dates in different places where no one could see them, in order to spend at least a little time together. One last trip. In the fall of 2003, the lovers decided to get away from everyone for a while, taking a trip to a remote, deserted area to be alone for a while. They carefully prepared for the trip, which was to be an exciting adventure for them. And above all, the boys took care of a plausible alibi that would justify their absence and would not arouse suspicion. Felipe told his parents that he and his friends were going on a camping trip. Liana, on the other hand, could think of nothing better to say than that she was going on a sightseeing trip with the guys from church. She knew for sure that this excuse would work and her parents would let her go, no questions asked. The Friedenbach and Café families believed the stories made up by the teenagers and let their children go to their deaths without worrying about anything. Liana and Felipe were unspeakably happy. They could enjoy each other's company for a whole week without fear of inhibitions and censure from their parents. The young people decided to go to a picturesque province called Embu-Guasu. They took with them a tent, sleeping bags, some personal belongings, and a small stock of provisions. But the couple had practically no money, and this caused some difficulties. Being students, they had the right to free public transportation, so the guys thought out and calculated their route in advance to get to their destination by bus. Early in the morning of October 31st, the lovers met at the agreed place, taking care that no one who knew them could see them together. They took the first bus, and after reaching another city in the late evening, they spent the night right in the bus station. Then 2 more transports took them to their desired location. From there, they had to walk a few kilometers to a deserted place hidden in the woods, where they planned to camp and spend a few days alone with each other. The day was warm and sunny, and the young people, in spite of their fatigue after the long journey, were in good spirits, joking, laughing, and making plans for their little vacation. When they reached the place marked on the map, they began to set up their modest but cozy camp. Uninvited guests. When Liana and Felipe traveled to such a remote and secluded place, they did not take into account the fact that in those areas reigns poverty, against which crime thrives. So the appearance of well-dressed young men with large backpacks and bags did not go unnoticed. As the couple walked through the forest to the abandoned farm where they planned to stay, they caught the eye of local bandits fishing near a pond. They were Paulo Cesar de Silva Marques, nicknamed Pernambuco, and Roberto Alves Cardoso, known as Chiampino. The latter was only 16 years old, but he was already the leader of the gang he organized. The criminals were interested in strangers, especially they liked a beautiful young girl. In addition, they decided that in their backpacks there was something to gain, and they could rob them. The bandits stealthily followed the guys and began to watch, lurking in the thickets. The lovers set up a tent, had a snack, and then began to beautify the place of their parking lot. The intruders sat in ambush until they were sure that no one else would join the young men, and they had no weapons on them. Hernanbuku and Ciampino then attacked Liana and Felipe, threatening them, and the latter, frightened, did not even try to run away or fight back against the unknown assailants. Having searched all the bags and backpacks, the criminals found nothing that could interest them. Then the bandits decided that they could demand ransom for the boy and the girl from their relatives. Liana, who was scared to death, immediately confirmed that she was from a rich family, and her father would give them as much money as they asked for. The criminals were happy about this turn, but since they had no experience in such cases, they did not know how to organize everything in order to stay with the money and free in the end. Prisoners. While the plan was maturing, and the bandits were trying to figure out who they had in their hands and how much they could ask for their lives, they decided to hide the prisoners so they couldn't escape. Initially, they were taken to a dilapidated structure near the very farm where the boys were staying, but there were no windows or doors. It was soon decided to bring the pair to the home of one of the gang members. There, Felipe was tied up and severely beaten so that he could not make an escape and offer no resistance. That same night, all the gang members took turns taking advantage of the bound and helpless girl, finally breaking her morally. The criminals could not figure out how to demand and collect the ransom, so they simply decided to get rid of the captives and hide their bodies somewhere in the woods so that they would never be found. After torturing the boys, the next day they were taken to a deserted place in the woods. The half-dead Felipe Fernambuco took them deep into the forest, from where a shot was heard, and then the bandit returned alone. Liana realized what had happened and that her beloved was no longer alive, although the kidnappers tried to assure her that they had released the young man. They had other plans for the beautiful young Liana. The scoundrels wanted to keep her as a plaything until they got bored with her, especially since no one had started looking for the missing boys at that time. A couple of days after her daughter's departure, her parents found out that there was no excursion trip with the guys from the church, and Liana's friends don't know where she went. The Friedenbach family guessed that their heiress had run off with her boyfriend and immediately contacted his parents to find out where their children might be. But Cafe's family was sure their son had gone camping with his buddies, so there was nothing they could do to help locate the couple. The situation was complicated by the fact that neither of the young men had been in touch for several days, and their phones were turned off. Thanks to his connections and money, Henri put on their feet literally all the police in the city. Step by step, bit by bit, they managed to reconstruct the route the young people took after they had run away from home by trickery. The police soon reached Embu-Guasu, but the boys got off their last bus, and further their way lay through a deserted wooded area. It was also there that their phones were last online. A large-scale search began, involving police officers, rescuers, and just concerned people who, having learned about the incident, decided to help. A large local businessman also joined the operation, providing his personal helicopter to search from the air and spreading leaflets with photos of the missing young people. Their camp was found quite quickly, and it looked frightening. Despite the lack of signs of blood and fighting, it was clear that something terrible had happened here. The couple's personal belongings had been turned out of their bags and carelessly scattered. The tent had been opened from top to bottom with a knife, and the guys' cell phones were lying around. Scouring every mile, rescuers soon discovered Felipe's breathless body. The tied-up guy had been shot in the back of the head almost at point-blank range, so he had no chance of being rescued. It became clear that the probability of finding Liana alive is minimal, but hope, as they say, dies last. Henri Friedenbach involved the press in the search, making sure that the whole process was widely covered in the media, and as many people as possible learned about it. For any information about Liana's whereabouts, an impressive reward was announced, but it did not help the case: the massacre of Liana. After the criminals got rid of Felipe, They brought Liana back to the house where they had previously held them both. By then, the bandits had been joined by their accomplices, Antonio Gaetano da Silva and Agnaldo Pires. Ciampino proudly announced to them that Liana was his property and could do whatever he wanted with her. He invited everyone to fulfill their dirtiest fantasies with Liana, and his offer was immediately accepted. A day later, after learning about the large-scale search operation, the criminals decided to change their location and moved with the victim to the house of Anthony Matias de Barros, another member of the gang. In the evening of the same day, they went fishing, taking Liana with them. The ringleader threw his jacket over her because it was chilly outside, and he decided to show concern in this way. In the evening, the older brother of Ciampino, whom the juvenile delinquent had not told about his affairs, came to the same place. Ciampino told his brother that Liana was his lover, but he immediately recognized her as the wanted girl. He took his brother aside and said that his captive was being actively sought, so that the police were literally following them. Ciampino took his brother's words as a sign and a call to action. He decided that it was urgent to get rid of Liana and then run away and lay low. He lied to Liana, saying that she was free and he would lead her to the road. In fact, the bandit led his victim into the forest, where he brutally killed her with a knife and then smashed her head with a rock to make sure she was dead. Liana's body was not found until 5 days after the massacre. There was literally no life on her. She was very badly mutilated. Liana was wearing the killer's jacket, which later became one of the key pieces of evidence. The criminals were incredibly cruel, cynical, and ruthless, but at the same time, as stupid and short-sighted. They did not try to run or hide, did not bother to destroy the physical evidence, and at the same time believed that no one would ever find them. This naive self-confidence of the bandits helped the police quickly identify them and apprehend all members of the criminal gang. Ciampino, as I have already said, left his jacket on the victim's body, which had his sweat marks on it. In addition, he brought the murder weapon to his house, washed it, and hid it in the yard, while he tried to wash the clothes with traces of the murdered girl's blood so that he could continue to wear them. According to the results of DNA analysis, it was possible to identify the gang members who had committed violence against Liana. All the gang members were apprehended almost simultaneously. The ringleader not only did not deny it, but immediately began to testify, boasting that it was he who had kidnapped, abused, and then killed the unfortunate victim. He described in detail everything that had happened to Liana in the last days of her life. Following a lengthy trial, almost all of the adult members of the criminal gang received fairly harsh sentences. Hernan Buca was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of Felipe. Antonio Gaetano da Silva, as well as Agnaldo Pires, also received life sentences. But Anthony Matias de Barros was sentenced to only 6 years in prison because he himself did not torture the victim, but provided the gang with his house where it all took place. However, with the ringleader and the most brutal member of the gang, everything was not so simple. At the time of his crimes, he himself was barely 16 years old. For this reason, the guy was sent to a specialized prison for minors with a fairly mild regime. Ciampino made several escape attempts, behaved aggressively and inadequately, because of which he was appointed a psychiatric examination. He was found to have several mental abnormalities, which in themselves were not something dangerous, but in the sum gave a monstrous result, turning the young man into a sophisticated sadist and murderer without feelings of pity or remorse. After such a diagnosis, the criminal was transferred to a closed-type medical institution, where he was to undergo compulsory treatment and rehabilitation. No further punishment was ever achieved for him, despite numerous appeals filed by the families of the murdered young men. As a result, Ciampino ended up in better conditions than he had been in before the crime. He now had his own private, cozy room with a large TV, internet access, and a comfortable bed with an orthopedic mattress. He has a balanced 4 meals a day with a customized menu, which is part of the policy of the medical facility where he is being held. His monthly maintenance is estimated at about $12,000. That's about $2,500. In recent years, the perpetrator has regularly petitioned for his release, noting that he has undergone a full course of treatment and no longer poses any threat to others, which means he can return to his normal life. This is a monstrous story. Hello everyone. Today, we're taking you through an urgent cold case, and we need your help with it right now. We're going to ask you to watch to the end and sign the petition to reopen the police investigation into the bizarre death of Elizabeth Santos immediately. If local news plus lawyers in Alaska can start paying attention, this family can finally get the answers and the closure that they need. So please, share this video and spread the word about this case as fast as you can. We don't have much time. On August 8, 2020, in Anchorage, Alaska, 2 Anchorage police officers responded to a 911 call made by Lizette Hoagland Hall. When they arrived at her home, they found Lizette Hoagland Hall, her son Desmond, and Lizette's friend Elizabeth Omatara Santos. Elizabeth was bleeding to death from multiple stab wounds. Hi, welcome back to Mysterious 7. My name is Matt, and today I'm going to take you back 2 years in the past to tell you Elizabeth's story. Now, I'm going to be honest with you guys. This one was pretty upsetting for me. On this channel, I try to be as honest with you guys as I can, but I have to be clear. There are some very graphic details and untold secrets that are still unfolding in this case, much of which are difficult to stomach. And it is starting to feel pretty personal to me. You see, this is the first time on Mysterious 7 that we have personally responded to a cry for help. We are not professional investigators, but when Elizabeth's brother, Sebia Santos, reached out to us, we knew we had to tell his story. Elizabeth Omatara Santos was a 37-year-old African-American woman of Nigerian-Brazilian ancestry. She was a Florida native and had been living in Alaska on and off since 2010. In the days leading up to her death, Elizabeth had just broken up with her boyfriend of 10 years, Dustin Curpius. At that point, Elizabeth left Dustin's home and went to stay with her friend and co-worker, Lizette Hoagland Hall. All friends who were interviewed by the APD following her death stated that Elizabeth was happy with the breakup, but still worried about her ex-boyfriend. Elizabeth's friends all described her as one of the sweetest, kindest, and calmest people they ever knew. Unfortunately, an argument and confrontation with Lizette wound up cutting her life short. Now, we still don't know exactly what started that fight, but the following sequence of events comes straight from police records. At 6 a.m., the fight between Lizette Hoagland Hall and Elizabeth Santos began. Lizette claimed that she and her adult son, Desmond Marcus Hall, managed to run upstairs to the second floor of their home to hide in a bathroom. From there, Lizette called 911, claiming that she was in fear for her life. At 6:16 a.m., patrol officers Tae Yoon and Valeria Estrella from the APB arrived on the scene. Once on the scene, they observed that Elizabeth was showing symptoms of mental confusion, including erratic movements and slurred speech, as she was unable to speak clearly. The officers quickly assumed that behavior probably stemmed from some kind of substance that she had consumed. They noted that Elizabeth was dressed only in an open robe. The officers claimed that Elizabeth's wounds didn't seem serious, but case photos and documentation showed that the robe she was wearing was heavily saturated in blood. The officers made note of the bruising and scratches on Lizette's face that stemmed from her recent fight with Elizabeth. The second was that the surroundings were messy with knocked-over plants. At 6:42 a.m., Elizabeth was placed into handcuffs. At 6:46 a.m., paramedics arrived and Elizabeth was placed in an ambulance. At 7:23 a.m., the paramedics officially began the transport to the hospital, 37 minutes after Elizabeth was placed inside. At 7:36 a.m., the ambulance reached the hospital and Elizabeth was rushed into emergency surgery. Reports mention that the surgeons were confused about the information they were given, especially considering the extent of the injuries and the extreme blood loss. At 7:56 a.m., the same two patrol officers, Yoon and Estrella, were dispatched and told to return to the scene to take Lizette and Desmond into custody. At 8:20 a.m., the same two officers finally returned to the scene of the crime. Minutes prior, Lizette had managed to somehow unlock Elizabeth's iPhone and call Elizabeth's sister Nikki in Miami. Nikki thought that it was Elizabeth calling, so imagine her utter shock and confusion when she heard a loud and belligerent woman yelling, "Your sister Elizabeth owes me money. She has some holes in her. Your sister owes me money. The paramedics left with her a while ago. She has holes in her. Elizabeth owes me some money. Wait, now the cops are back." That was how Elizabeth's family, all the way across the country in Miami, first found out about her life-threatening injuries. Lizette and Desmond were then driven to the police station in separate cars and interviewed in separate rooms. Now, to me, this part sounds like shutting the barn door long after the horses have run off and gone, doesn't it? Because this mother and son duo had more than enough time between the departure and return of the officers to potentially plot what to say and what not to say, and to tamper with the crime scene. So why was it assumed that they had done nothing and were in no way responsible for what happened to Elizabeth in their house? But let's get back to the timeline here. At 10:30 a.m., Lizette was interviewed by Officer Jason DeVille. During her statement, Lizette told the interviewing officer the story about the fight, running to hide and calling 911 with her son, and then seeing Elizabeth's injuries for the first time when the patrol officers arrived on the scene. Lizette later described the fight with Elizabeth in more detail to Officer DeVille.
And I just started like saying, doesn't calling the and calling sort of yesterday. Upstairs or downstairs. He was downstairs that I don't know if he was in the dorm room or in his bedroom, kind of downstairs. Yeah, things that downstairs. And so I went upstairs. So she wanted to go back and kind of like, do you know where hits a guy? So he's drawing your back and she's trying to claw you, bite you. How are you defending yourself? I just kind of let block you. So you had your hands in front of your face. Oh, I love it, do I? Yeah, over the fuffled. And then, but she eventually stopped. No, I didn't think yes. Well, I only ever like gone away from her. Oh, you know, I was there. Like, I just kind of like scooted my way and ran out of dinners and telling some calling her head. And then, she brushes from I didn't leave a call from here and from it. My phone, I lost me to and like suddenly we called. I tried and said she brought his phone upstairs. I found she and her hid and would you order in my room? We locked the door and read. So my doctor has two doors. It goes like this, two doors. And she like hanging on the door. So you're in the bathroom. No, if it's connected, the dock thing is connected to my bedroom. So you're hiding in your bedroom with the doors locked. Oh, me and my son are both in that room with the doors locked. And when we hear her in the kitchen, we hear her out there saying that murmurs already. It sounds like it not really like you told hear it. It's more like that. So they were playing. I think that's from Mayor. She banged on the door for the lead up the door her out. What she was about to bust to open the door sprained her. So a good was like, well, thanks, try to get in.
In this interview, Lizette claimed that Elizabeth had been banging and screaming at her locked bedroom door during that 6 a.m. 911 phone call. However, none of these alleged noises could be heard in the background during that call. Also, something that should be mentioned is that Lizette lives in a duplex, and her next-door neighbor that she shares a wall with did not recall hearing any noise around that time either. She did, however, mention hearing banging noises around 3 a.m. Lizette further described how Elizabeth had no injuries prior to the arrival of the patrol officers. So the injuries just magically appeared just as the police officers showed up. But also, Lizette saw Elizabeth inflicting the injuries on herself earlier, and Elizabeth was able to bang on the room door and stab herself repeatedly at the same time. Sure, that checks out. Lizette then describes to Officer DeVille the main knife that Elizabeth allegedly used to stab herself with many times over and its possible location. Did you see anything? He said when you came out, you saw water and stuff. Did you see anything in your house that might have caused that? Any viral object? I saw him, Rave. Okay, so you did see him, Rave. But I didn't do anything because I was too listening on the phone. Okay, where was the Murray? Upstairs in the We're next to the couch. Oh, we're probably reminders this. It's just like it's either a thief rave or it was like the lyric size up. Like, like it's one or the other. At 10:33 a.m., Desmond Hall was interviewed by Detective Jeff Bell over in the very next interrogation room. Rather than explaining what happened, Desmond asked for an attorney. So she has injuries. She's at the hospital. Yeah, so they changed her winner. Then police first got there to now, and she has some very serious injuries. So, yeah, so that's why we got all that's why it's not given the dignity of what originally saw on Major theme. Very well be an explanation for it. At 12:48 p.m., Officer DeVille returned to Lizette's interrogation room and informed her of Elizabeth's death at the hospital. Now, bear in mind that previously, Lizette stated that Elizabeth was uninjured prior to the arrival of the patrol officers. But Lizette's story immediately changed once she learned about the death. We're hiding in the room. I have my fan and I don't care. I tried this after the voice fed, or right before. I called a great and Navarro swap after the house, and then I heard her in the cute swim. And then I heard her model on it. I heard the talking and stuff, but I've been fine. We were staying at the hotel till the cops got there. I know I'd rather be my it would you section lit Alan on afterwards, but I just like Merk light either that age. I've been told telling and door and this like I mean it. I had the door locked and it's still I do honored and like Kuskin, it was no order well nice as a Later that afternoon, both Lizette and Desmond were freed from police custody. And despite Lizette's criminal history, neither her nor her son, Desmond Hall, were ever charged. After Elizabeth's death, a lot of misinformation was set in motion by her ex-boyfriend, Dustin. He told the APD that one time in the past, Elizabeth had supposedly handled a knife while having an altercation with him. However, Dustin's own sister commented that his memory can't necessarily be trusted, since he was often very forgetful as a result of his epilepsy, which causes occasional seizures. Incidentally, Elizabeth's toxicology report shows the presence of midazolam, a medication that Elizabeth was never prescribed and is used to treat seizures. Multiple friends of Elizabeth that were interviewed by the APD all disputed Lizette's description of her behavior. They all describe her as a non-violent, non-drug user and in a good mood when they last spoke. One friend in particular last saw Elizabeth 6 days earlier, but mentioned that Elizabeth called her the day before her death. He cut me with back. He was kind of quite bad. But kind of forgot that like he was going to shoot her or something. The day of Elizabeth's death, Lizette began to tell people that she had watched Elizabeth stab herself repeatedly and slit her own throat. Detective Bell called another friend that Elizabeth attempted to contact a couple of hours before the stabbing, and Bell asked for his perspective. Additional audio evidence from that day has recently surfaced that was originally suppressed by the APD, which includes first-hand accounts of what Lizette's neighbors saw and heard that morning. She only said 2 sentences, but she kept on screaming, you think. An overdose screaming and just the blows. Voice you can never hear if someone put out like Gus. Real
Perhaps the most compelling eyewitness statement came from a neighbor who, according to Google Earth, lives only 177 feet away from Lizette's home. So as the family continued to fight to get the case reopened, they found it even more disturbing in January of 2021 when they found out that many of Elizabeth's friends and associates in Anchorage had thrown a birthday party for her around that same time. But who throws a birthday party for someone who recently died brutally under extremely abnormal circumstances and then invites the main suspect? As you can see from these images, they clearly had a great time. One friend in attendance did tell the family that he showed up in support of Elizabeth's memory, but was quickly creeped out by the aura upon arrival and Lizette's presence. Is it even possible that the extremely weird and horrifyingly inappropriate birthday party was intended as some sort of celebration of Elizabeth's death instead of her life? I mean, hey, it has been known to happen. The Santos family has also attempted to gain police dashcam footage of the APD patrol officer's initial arrival to Lizette's home, but the APD claims that this footage does not exist. Based on jurisdictional restrictions, only an attorney licensed in Alaska can help the Santos family fight for justice. To date, the family has reached out to various law firms in Alaska, the State Bar Association, the Alaska Bureau of Investigations, the ACLU, and countless reporters, including the only reporter who wrote about the incident, Marlise Irby of KTUU. Their pleas for assistance have been ignored constantly, and reporter Marlise Irby eventually left the station without ever replying to requests to update her article. Other reporters in Anchorage have interviewed the family and promised to release the story, but never have. After further review of the crime scene photos, it was determined that there was actually a fourth knife found on the scene that was never mentioned in the police report. This knife was found in the garage nearby where Lizette said the fight between her and Elizabeth occurred. To further add to this, a recent conversation between Desmond Hall and a private investigator also confirms that Elizabeth did not stab herself.
It's almost like, I know, it was a ghost. I didn't see her grab the line. I didn't see her cutting herself.
The head of APD's homicide unit, Sergeant Bianca Cross, and her superior officers still insist that the blood-soaked open robe that Elizabeth was wearing was actually soaked in sweat. Based on police reports, Lizette claims that the only substance she gave Elizabeth in the hours leading up to her death were 4 Benadryls. Also, keep in mind one key fact, that Elizabeth's ex-boyfriend Dustin and Lizette's son Desmond are also friends with one another. Sergeant Cross continues to claim that there were no signs of a struggle and that the APD has no suspects. To date, Cross refuses to process any of the collected forensic information collected the day of the murder. The case was never ruled a homicide, and contrary to popular belief, it was never ruled a suicide by the medical examiner, and Elizabeth had no injuries to the neck whatsoever. Overall, it is really concerning as to why the APD and the media are going to such great lengths to suppress the story. Thus, it begs the question, who is connected to whom, and why is it so important that this case remains suppressed? In the state of Alaska, the statute of limitations to file a civil suit in a case like this is 2 years. August 8, 2022 marks this 2-year deadline. So it is most likely that the APD knows that they botched the entire investigation so badly that they are purposely waiting for this date to pass before they admit fault and reopen the case. So that's how it turned out that Elizabeth Omatara Santos, a young woman with no previous known history of violence, drug abuse, or mental instability, ended up dying from accidentally stabbing herself 10 times. According to our own verification and research, the drug midazolam typically produces sleepiness and is also used in surgical procedures for anesthesia. However, it was confirmed that it was never given to her during her emergency surgery. Based on the narrative that Desmond provided to the private investigator, the presence of midazolam and what Elizabeth was wearing, was it possible that sexual assault was also involved? Because honestly, I'd love to know how a drugged and incoherent person could possibly be insane enough to quickly stab themselves at least 10 times, yet coordinated enough to do it with 3 different knives and neatly clean each one and plant them in 3 different locations, all while pounding at a locked bedroom door. All I can say is that this whole case, with all its many inconsistencies, has left a severely bad taste in my mouth. Lastly, following Elizabeth's death, rumors resurfaced that was also allegedly involved in the fatal stabbing of her ex-boyfriend in Alaska a few years earlier. Now, while we cannot confirm this, there is a plethora of evidence supporting the incident with Elizabeth Santos, and there haven't been any reports on it either. In less than 2 months, the window for a civil lawsuit of legal liability against the APD will close for this case. We have until August 2022 to get the word out. We'll continue with this investigation for as long as we can, and we hope to bring you some real answers in a follow-up episode. In the meantime, we need your support. Sign the petition, share this video, and let's get the word out about the unsolved murder of Elizabeth Santos. The links are in the description of this video. If local news plus lawyers in Alaska start paying attention, this family can finally get the answers and the closure that they need. If her killers are walking free today, we want to see them caught and brought to justice. Hello everybody, my name is Sibia Santos. I'm the brother of Elizabeth Santos. I want to thank everybody for sharing this information about this case and contacting the family to let them know that this case never made sense to anybody since day one. I also hope that it shows. Got the APB and the local media done like a very good job at pretending like this case never happened. With your help, this information about this case can be exposed to more people, and I hope that the family has to go with the world leave on. And please help us continue your fight for justice. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Vera Pecteleva. Vera Pecteleva was born on September 24, 1997 in Kelos, Kovo Oblast. As she grew up, she became a cheerful and creative individual. With a passion for singing, she secured first place in various school competitions. Although her parents, Oksana and Yvonne, divorced during her school years, they remained on good terms. Vera maintained a positive relationship with both her father's new wife and her mother's new husband. Those who knew her described Vera as a kind, optimistic, and non-confrontational person. As mentioned earlier, Vera was a creative individual, and her family was taken aback when, after completing high school, she opted to move to Kovo and pursue a technical education at the state university, rather than following a more artistic route. Her mother, Oksana, resided in Kisilov, which was approximately 110 miles away from Kovo, and Vera would visit her during her spare time. During one of her visits in 2016, Vera encountered Vladislav Kanyus, a young man of her age. Unlike Vera, Vlad, as he was commonly known, was a complete contrast. He did not have life goals, was introverted, and had a quick temper. Having dropped out of school after the 9th grade, Vlad grew up in a troubled home. After his mother abandoned the family, he was left to live with his father. Unfortunately, his life was filled with more challenges. His father had frequent run-ins with the law, which ultimately culminated in him taking his own life in front of Vlad, leaving an indelible mark on him. Vera fell in love with Vlad despite having little in common with him. However, her parents were against their relationship, knowing Vlad's troubled past. Vera's father discovered her relationship with Vlad, and he asked her to end it. Instead of breaking up with Vlad, Vera just stopped discussing him with her parents. Vlad was never present at family gatherings, and his pictures were not posted on Vera's social media. It seemed as though Vera was keeping him a secret, according to Oksana, Vera's mother. One important detail is worth noting. In 2019, Vera and Vlad began cohabiting in Kovo. Vera's parents financially assisted with the apartment, and Vlad, who was unemployed by choice, thoroughly enjoyed living with Vera, who was not only beautiful and intelligent, but also financially secure. She consistently had money and supported him. However, their relationship was strained.
Vlad struggled with alcohol addiction and showed no inclination to seek help or change his behavior. Her parents were convinced that Vlad was abusive to her. After years of suffering, Vera made the brave decision to end the toxic relationship in November 2019. However, Vlad refused to accept this and disputed her choice. As her parents had financially supported the couple's apartment, Vera reasonably expected Vlad to vacate the premises. But Vlad was unwilling to give up the benefits of living off someone else's generosity. Now here's an excerpt from Vlad's testimony. It will give you a more accurate idea of what happened after Vera decided to end her relationship with him. But remember, this is Vlad's testimony, so it's up to you whether you believe his words. On December 15, 2019, a fight broke out between him and Vera over his desire to visit a nightclub, which she opposed. This was not their first disagreement. Throughout their relationship, Vera had been frequently visiting Celos and drifting away from him. She even confessed to speaking with another person. In fact, she had ended her relationship with Vlad a month prior. He later discovered from a mutual friend that she was involved with Alexander, a resident of Celos. Although he had never met Alexander, when he confronted Vera, she acknowledged the relationship. At the time, they continued to cohabitate, but following their December 15 altercation, she left, taking some belongings with her. Despite their separation, they remained in contact by phone, and on January 12, 2020, he offered to assist her in relocating her remaining belongings to a new apartment. She agreed to meet him, and they scheduled a time for January 13th. They met in the afternoon, packed up both her belongings and his, since he too wanted to move out, and drank beer, liqueur, and vodka. They got drunk, but there was no conflict until he brought up the topic of their relationship and revealed that he knew about Alexander. She became enraged, swearing at him, insulting him, and starting to physically assault him, kicking him at least 5 times in the groin area and slapping him in the face at least 8 times. He only felt pain from the kicks, not the slaps. Vera instigated the physical fight, which made him angry because she had lied about not seeing another guy and was upset that he knew about her personal life. That was the testimony that Vlad told the police. Next, we'll discuss the other side of this story, which gives every reason to believe that Vlad was not honest in his testimony. Vera sent a voice message to her friend at 5:08 p.m. In the message, she mentioned that she was already at the apartment, packing her belongings. She expected to be settled into her new apartment around 6 p.m. and requested her friend's help to move her things from the taxi to the apartment. Just 3 minutes later, Vera sent a new voice message. She invited her friend to come to the apartment where she lived with Vlad and help her with the move. However, Vera did not have time to finish as Vlad intervened by saying, "No one's coming in here." So he was against Vera's friend coming to the apartment. It seems that the situation began to get out of control because 4 minutes later, at 5:15 p.m., Vera, in a low voice, asked her friend to come. It looks like this message was a call for help. She deliberately spoke in a low voice so that Vlad wouldn't hear her. At 5:25 p.m., Vera sends another voice message, and Vlad's dominant voice is heard again. He tells Vera's friend not to bother them and to wait for Vera to text her. At 7:19 p.m., Vlad recorded the voice message himself. From that moment on, Vera did not have access to her phone. She was left alone with the monster. But what happened next needs to be explained. At about 3 a.m., the neighbors from the same floor started waking up from the terrible screams coming from apartment 738. A witness called what was happening a massacre. The screams were so loud that 15 people gathered in the hallway near the apartment. Vlad's brother was among them, and he remembered Vlad's words and realized they needed to break down the door, since his brother had previously said that he would take Vera's life. The door to the apartment was made of iron, so the neighbors started looking for tools to force it open. All this time, Vera's heart-rending cries were coming from the apartment. People called the emergency service, and these calls eventually became part of a separate investigation. For 30 minutes, the police still weren't at the scene. It lasted until 6:30 a.m. During these 3.5 hours, people called the police, but no one came to Vera's aid. The witnesses made 7 calls to the emergency service while Vera was fighting for her life, but no one came. The last words they heard from behind the door were Vlad's. He said, "Vera, forgive me. I love you very much." In the end, the neighbors found a crowbar in a nearby parking lot and broke down the door. By this time, Vera was already dead, and Vlad was in the bathroom. He was very drunk. While Vera was painfully dying at the hands of her former boyfriend, and the neighbors were trying in vain to get help from the police, the 112 operators were talking about life, laughing, drinking tea, and were very unhappy that they were being disturbed. The police arrived only after it became known that Vera had died. Later, they will claim that there was no gas in one car and that there were no available officers as everyone was busy with other calls. As a result, the 112 operators and the police officers on duty that night were on trial too. The video from the police station was published during the investigation, but there is no point in translating it into English. I can describe it in just one word: indifference, and it is clear even without subtitles. But Vlad claimed there were no conflicts between him and Vera until 5 a.m. However, the forensic examination showed that he lied. Vera received her first injury 6 hours before her death, that is, at about midnight. It meant that Vlad Kanyus was beating and injuring her for 6 hours until she took her last breath. Her body bore around 100 injuries, including stab wounds, a broken nose, and broken ribs. Strangulation marks were also visible on her neck. If the police's inaction shocked you, then be prepared for what comes next, which will be just as astonishing. More than 1,000 people gathered for Vera Pekteleva's funeral. The church could not accommodate everyone. According to Oksana, Vera's mother, the funeral home spent 4 hours trying to restore Vera's face with makeup, but she still could not recognize her daughter. That's how serious her injuries were. Meanwhile, Vlad Kanyus was telling the investigators his version of what happened. He of course tried to downplay his role in this crime. He said about that night that when he started talking to her about our relationship, he suggested they should get back together and told her that he knew she was seeing another guy. A conflict between them started. She didn't like it. After that, she started swearing, insulting him, and hitting him. Namely, she kicked him at least 5 times in the groin area and hit him in the face at least 8 times with her palm. He didn't feel any pain when she slapped him. However, when she kicked him between the legs, he experienced physical pain. That is, Vera started hitting him first. It made him angry. He was angry that she lied and said she wasn't dating another guy. At the same time, Vera said that he was prying into her personal life because he knew everything about her. During this time, she continued to insult him, and he got angry and hit her several times with his palms, about 4 times on the head, but the blows were of small force. When he hit Vera, she fell to the floor, hitting the closet. She was lying on her stomach. She also hit him back, namely, she beat his head with her palms and fists. It was painful. He asked her to stop, but she didn't stop. He remembered she scratched his back. Then he decided to take her by the neck. He saw an iron that was on the floor. He took this iron and wrapped the iron cord around Vera's neck. After that, he tightened the cord around her neck slightly. He squeezed her neck for 1.5 minutes or 2. At that moment, he didn't realize that he could kill Vera with his actions. He didn't want to kill Vera. He was tightening the cord around Vera's neck because he wanted to scare her. He wanted her to lose consciousness. He wanted her to fall asleep for 15 minutes. After he removed the cord from her neck, she started making sounds, coughing or wheezing. When he removed the cord from Vera's neck, she was in a prone position, but then he put her on her back. At that moment, she was unconscious. At the same time, she made sounds, that is, wheezed. He thought she was fine. After a while, he started waking Vera up, but she was unresponsive. Then he started listening to whether her heart was beating. He put his ear to her mouth, then to her heart. She had no pulse, she wasn't breathing. He don't remember what happened next. He remembered that at some point, he ended up in the bathroom. At the same time, he had a knife in his hands. He took a knife with me because he wanted to hurt myself. He didn't want to live because he realized that Vera was dead. He didn't want to kill her. After some time, the door to the apartment opened, and his brother and a police officer were inside. After that, he was told to get dressed. He was taken to the police station. He's sorry for what he did. He do not deny that it was his actions that caused Vera's death. He didn't want to kill her. He want to apologize to Vera's family. As you have noticed, Vlad has a selective memory. He remembered strangling Vera, but did not remember how he inflicted about 100 injuries on her. It was also unclear how Vera could have punched him in the face and scratched his back while she was lying on her stomach on the floor. During the interrogation, it also became clear how Vlad's brother ended up at the crime scene. After all, he lived in another city. Here's what Vlad told the police about it. He called his brother. He told him about what happened. He told him that Vera wasn't breathing, and his brother told me to call an ambulance and give her CPR. He tried to give her first aid. He tried to give her CPR and cardiac massage. During the investigation, it became known that he called his brother at about midnight and said that he was going to take Vera's life. At the second interrogation, when asked again about the injuries on Vera's body, he replied, "It was probably me who caused those injuries to Vera." He did not count the number of his blows, but these injuries that were found on Vera's body by the expert may have been caused by me. He don't remember how many times he hit her, but he think it's the same number as indicated by the expert. He admit he caused her all the injuries indicated in the report. He wanted silence. He didn't think about her suffering. She screamed and insulted him during their conflict. He didn't enjoy hitting her, but he didn't like her screaming. He wanted her to shut up. He didn't think about her suffering at that time. Vlad Kanyus also said he had consensual intimate relations with Vera that evening. The related charges were eventually dropped. It was difficult to prove the opposite. Police officers and emergency service operators were charged with negligence. It's hard to believe, but they were not suspended from work during the investigation and continued to provide ridiculous justifications. The prosecutor demanded real prison terms for all 5 defendants, but the judge decided otherwise. They received suspended sentences ranging from 1.5 to 2 years. The court also ordered each defendant to pay around $350 to the victims. Simultaneously, the police department had to pay approximately $111,000. The amounts have been converted from the Russian ruble to US dollars for easier understanding. The indictment states that the police officers had access to gasoline and should have taken appropriate measures to resolve the situation, but they did not consider it an urgent task. Both police officers refused to cooperate with the investigation and did not admit guilt. They claimed that when witnesses reported the woman's screams and cries for help, the investigation team was at another address where a man's corpse had been found. We may never know the full truth of what happened that night. Vera was not planning to stay in the apartment and had asked her friend for help with moving, suggesting that Vlad Kanyus may have forced her to consume alcohol when she was unconscious, then fabricated a story to make the event seem unintentional. In the summer of 2022, the court sentenced Vlad Kanyus to 17 years in prison, and he partially admitted his guilt. He was also ordered to pay around $45,000 in compensation. However, this verdict shocked Vera's parents, who planned to appeal, believing the punishment was too lenient. Surprisingly, Vlad Kanyus did not even serve a full year in prison. In November 2023, photos of him in military uniform appeared online, and in April 2023, it became known that he had received a presidential pardon after 6 months of participation in the ongoing armed conflict in Russia. He was also relieved of the obligation to pay any compensation to Vera's parents. Vera's case has caused widespread resonance in Russia, and the news about Vlad Kanyos's pardon has been equally controversial. The press secretary of the Russian president stated that there are specific procedures for granting pardons, including a confession of guilt by the convict and the possibility of redeeming oneself on the battlefield. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Min Lin and Yoon Lin's love story began in the late 1980s during their college years at an Australian university. Both were natives of China who had separately emigrated to Australia to pursue higher education. Yoon through an exchange program, and Min, who was 2 years her senior, remained in the country for a professional internship. They met in a university corridor, which they later recalled as a case of love at first sight. They shared common roots and dreams, and both felt like outsiders in a foreign land, but were united by their aspirations to start a new life in Australia. After graduation, the couple married and settled in the picturesque and peaceful suburb of North Epping in Sydney. Their love grew into a large, close-knit family, deeply connected and devoted to one another. In August 1994, they welcomed their first child, a daughter named June Brenda Lin, who was commonly known by her middle name Brenda. Their son Henry was born in 1997, followed by the youngest, Terry, in 2000. Entering the 2000s, Min and Yoon decided to start a business venture, opening a small newsstand. Their dedication transformed this modest beginning into a thriving news agency with its publishing arm on Rose Street. The Lin family's business prospered, enabling them to enjoy a comfortable lifestyle with a spacious home, a luxury car, and prestigious private schooling for their children. Min focused on business matters, while Yoon dedicated herself to homemaking and nurturing their children. In their community, the Lins were well respected for their diligence, kindness, and charitable work. They were known as exemplary, caring parents who avoided conflicts. Brenda, their eldest, was exceptionally beautiful and an excellent student with a compassionate nature towards animals. The boys, Henry and Terry, were energetic and sports-loving, sharing a passion for soccer. The siblings shared a strong bond and were almost inseparable. As the Lin family settled in Australia and their financial prosperity grew, they began inviting relatives from China to visit, live, or even stay permanently. In the early 2000s, Min's parents were the first to move to North Epping, living nearby and helping with the children. Min's father also worked in their newsstand on weekends. A few years later, Yoon's parents also moved to the Sydney suburb, with Min and Yoon buying them a small house. Yoon's sister, Irene, came to live with the Lins, assisting with household chores and the children. By this time, the Lin family business was generating substantial income, reportedly nearing $1 million annually. Their venture wasn't just a shop or publishing house. It had become a local hub where people gathered to read and discuss news over coffee. Towards the end of 2007, Min Lin's younger sister, Kathy Lin Nai, and her husband, Lian Bin Robert, also moved to Australia, seeking better opportunities in the bustling city of Sydney. They had visited relatives in Australia before and briefly lived in Melbourne, but this time they were determined to settle in Australia permanently. Robert, a former successful ENT doctor in China, decided to switch careers and try entrepreneurship. The Lins opened their own restaurant in Sydney, investing all their savings, but the business struggled and soon closed. Subsequent attempts to open a cafe or snack bar also failed, as Robert lacked business acumen and financial management skills. Eventually, Robert and Kathy moved to North Epping, closer to family. The Lin and Robert families were bound not only by kinship, but also by strong friendship. They saw each other almost daily, stayed in constant touch, and often gathered for family meals. Their last such gathering was on the evening of Friday, July 17, 2009, at the home of Kathy and Min's parents. Unbeknownst to them, this would be their final reunion. The Lin family home was the scene of a gruesome massacre on the morning of July 18th. The Lin family's shop remained unexpectedly closed, surprising their regular customers. The shop, which had operated 7 days a week for years, showed no signs of opening, with no notice or warning on the doors. This unusual occurrence raised concerns among the customers and neighboring shop owners. One of them, after several unsuccessful attempts to reach Min, called his sister Kathy to inquire about the situation. Kathy was both surprised and alarmed, knowing her brother had never closed the shop for a day without prior arrangements, often having their father or father-in-law cover for him. She tried calling Min and then his wife Yunli, but to no avail, as her calls to their home phone also went unanswered. Worried, Kathy and her husband Robert decided to visit Min's house to ensure everything was all right. Arriving around 9 a.m., they noticed the family car in the driveway and found the front door unlocked, but no sign of the homeowners. The house was eerily quiet, and calls for the family members went unanswered. The house appeared undisturbed, with no signs of forced entry. Kathy, repeatedly calling out for her brother, ascended to the second floor. Upon opening the bedroom door of Min and Yunli Lin, she screamed in shock and horror, staggering back at the gruesome scene before her. The room was completely covered in blood, across the floor, walls, ceiling, furniture, and curtains. The lifeless body of 43-year-old Yunli Lin lay near the bed, mutilated beyond immediate recognition. In the adjacent room where 39-year-old Irene, Yunli's sister, slept, the scene was equally ghastly. Irene lay dead in her bed, her face a bloody pulp. In the children's bedrooms, 12-year-old Henry and 9-year-old Terry had also been brutally beaten to death, their bodies lying in different corners of the room. Brenda, the 15-year-old daughter, had fortunately been away on a school trip the previous day and was not at home during the tragic night. The body of Min Lin was nowhere to be found, leading to a faint hope that he might be alive, possibly injured, taken hostage, or escaped. Kathy immediately called emergency services, but she was so hysterical from the shock that she struggled to convey what had happened. She screamed and cried into the phone, begging for medics to arrive quickly and try to save anyone they could. However, the first responders could only confirm the deaths of all the victims at the scene of the massacre. The morning after, a chilling discovery followed Kathy's frantic call to emergency services. Robert left to fetch the Lin parents, who lived about 10 kilometers away from the crime scene. The police and paramedics arrived within minutes, and what they encountered was immediately dubbed as one of the most horrific crime scenes they had ever witnessed. Tragically, it was too late for any member of the Lin family. Each had been killed by multiple blows to the head with a heavy blunt object resembling a hammer. However, the lethal weapon was nowhere to be found, leading investigators to conclude that the perpetrator had taken it with them. Min Lin's body was eventually discovered in his own bedroom, covered with a blood-soaked blanket. Like his family, he had been beaten to death in a similar manner. It appeared that he was the first victim, followed by his wife, her sister, and lastly the two boys. An initial inspection of the crime scene did not yield any significant clues or leads. The absence of the lethal weapon, combined with the fact that valuables and money were left untouched, indicated that the primary objective was the elimination of the Lin family rather than robbery. Initially, multiple assailants were suspected, as it seemed unlikely that one person could single-handedly overpower so many. However, evidence suggested that the children were awake and had desperately tried to escape during the attack, as indicated by blood stains and splatters throughout the house. Interestingly, all adult victims besides head injuries also showed signs of strangulation, possibly to minimize resistance during the assault. Identical bloody shoe prints were found in each room with a unique tread pattern, but the shoe brand could not be identified, only its size. No fingerprints were discovered, suggesting that the killer or killers wore gloves. At first, there were no leads or theories about the identity of the perpetrator, as family friends and neighbors unanimously stated that the Lins had no known enemies. The motive for such a brutal massacre of 5 people remained unclear. The time of the attack was established to be between midnight and 3 a.m. on July 18th. Brenda Lin, the eldest and now the sole survivor of the extensive Lin family, was on a school trip to New Caledonia at the time of the tragedy. She first learned of the horrific incident through social media and initially refused to believe that it involved her own family, hoping for some mistake. Her Aunt Kathy soon called her, confirming the dreadful news through tearful sobs. Brenda was quickly flown back to Sydney, where Kathy and Robert, her new guardians, met her at the airport. Brenda moved in with them as the Lynn family home was sealed as a crime scene. The next day, a grief-stricken Brenda was brought to the police station for questioning. However, she could offer no new information, insisting that her family had no enemies or ill-wishers and had noticed nothing unusual before her trip. Following her family's death, Brenda became the heir to a substantial fortune, including property in the family business. However, being a minor and still in school, her legal guardians, Aunt Kathy and her husband Robert, were responsible for managing the estate. Brenda's grandparents also offered their support, but Kathy and Robert insisted on being her primary caretakers. Robert even threatened legal action if the elderly relative sought custody, arguing they were too old to care for a teenager. Eventually, the matter was settled amicably, and Brenda remained with her aunt and uncle. The Lynn's shop and publishing business, which had been temporarily closed, soon reopened under the management of the deceased, as Brenda was yet to take over the business operations. Robert also began actively reviewing the family's bank accounts, savings, real estate, and other assets. Investigation and theories experts repeatedly scrutinized the crime scene meticulously, documenting every detail. Despite their efforts, no concrete leads emerged. They deduced that the killer likely acted alone and entered the house quietly, suggesting either an unlocked door or the perpetrator having a key. The killer wore size 9.5 shoes with a distinct ornate tread pattern. The lethal weapon, believed to be a hammer, was never found in or around the house. The killer's use of gloves meant no fingerprints were left behind, and no foreign DNA was found, only traces from the 5 victims. A peculiar and significant detail was that blood stains were found on the doorknobs of each bedroom where the perpetrators occurred, indicating the killer's bloodied gloves touched them. However, there were no blood stains on the doorknob of Brenda's room, suggesting the killer knew she was not there. As one of Australia's most high-profile cases, the tragic incident was widely covered in the media, with no substantial evidence or suspects. Various improbable theories emerged, including rumors about the Lynn's alleged vast fortune leading to their demise, a robbery gone wrong, and even involvement of local Chinese mafia clans. These theories weren't entirely dismissed, given the area's history with a burglary gang, as the Lynn shop had been attacked months before the tragedy, and men had witnessed an armored car robbery a week before the fatal incidents, although the criminals wore masks and the men couldn't identify them. It was speculated that the perpetrator might have been eliminated as a potential witness. Months passed with the investigation at a standstill. None of the theories were substantiated, and no suspects emerged. The robbery theory was eventually ruled out as money and valuables were untouched, and the killer seemed to have a different motive, singular purpose to eliminate the household members. Additionally, the power was cut off in the house on the night of the fatal incidents, indicating the killer knew where the electrical panel was, as their familiarity with the house in total darkness suggested they had been there before and knew the layout, possibly even obtaining a key in advance, a crucial overlooked clue. While reviewing the perplexing case details, an investigator repeatedly listened to Kathy's emergency call, searching for any overlooked clue. Surprisingly, a significant hint was found in that recording. The recording captured Kathy's hysterical attempts to explain the situation, her words jumbled and interrupted by cries and sobs. At the end of the call, when the operator confirmed that emergency services were on their way, Kathy unexpectedly mentioned her husband's name, adding something in Cantonese, directly addressing him. This detail piqued the investigators' interest, prompting them to translate her words. It turned out Kathy was pleading with her husband not to leave her alone in the house. This was significant because Robert had decided to fetch the Lynn parents on his own, leaving Kathy at the gruesome crime scene before the police arrived. Robert's behavior seemed highly suspicious, as 5 people had just been brutally taken away from the house, and the killer could still have been hiding inside, making Kathy a potential target. Yet Robert appeared calm and simply left as if he knew nothing bad would happen to his wife. After several unproductive months, the police finally identified a primary and sole suspect, Robert. It was discovered that he had a key to his brother-in-law's house, which his in-laws had given him just in case, shortly before the tragedy. Curiously, Robert never mentioned this during interrogations, and Kathy was unaware that her brother had given her husband a key. Brenda unknowingly revealed this crucial detail to the investigators. Further investigation revealed that Robert's claim of being a successful ENT doctor was a facade. While he did possess a medical degree, he never held a stable job in the field. Rumors suggested he fled to Australia to avoid punishment for alleged bribery charges in China. In Australia, Robert failed to establish himself professionally, squandering the last of his savings on unsuccessful business ventures. After moving to North Keeping, he became essentially idle, relying on his wife's income and occasional financial assistance from Kathy's relatives. Once the guardianship papers for Brenda were finalized, Robert acted as if he had inherited the Lynn family's estate. His first move was to force Lynn's parents out of the house that Min had bought for them, though it was legally under the deceased name. Even though Min and Kathy's parents remained in the house bought for them, considering these facts and circumstances, investigators theorized that Robert was driven by intense envy of his wife's more successful and wealthy relatives, harboring a long-standing plan to seize their property, money, and lucrative business. Despite living under the same roof as the perpetrator of the crime against her family, Brenda and Kathy weren't considered in immediate danger. Brenda was oblivious to the true nature of her cohabitant, while Kathy was needed by Robert to maintain control over the family's assets. However, the police couldn't arrest Robert yet due to lack of concrete evidence against him. Interrogation, surveillance, and arrest. The investigation team obtained permission to install several hidden cameras in the Robert household, hoping to gather the evidence needed to prove Robert's guilt. The breakthrough came sooner than expected, starting with an unsuspecting revelation by Kathy during an interrogation. Kathy mentioned her husband's preference for a particular brand of shoes a few years back. Robert had purchased 2 pairs of sneakers from a limited edition series that he particularly liked. He had worn out and discarded one pair, but the other was still carefully stored in its box at their home. Notably, Robert wore size 9.5 shoes, the same size as the killer's. The key evidence came when Robert was captured on one of the hidden cameras, meticulously destroying the box of the aforementioned shoes. This footage led to a warrant to search the suspect's home, where a new pair of size 9.5 sneakers was found. The tread pattern on these shoes matched the prints found at the crime scene. Additionally, a small smeared trace resembling blood was discovered in his garage. Forensic analysis confirmed that it was indeed a blood stain containing the DNA of all 5 Lynn family victims, literally linking it to the crime scene. This evidence led to Robert's arrest, finally providing the concrete proof the police needed to take action. During the trial, shocking revelations emerged. Robert vehemently denied any involvement, claiming the blood found in his garage appeared after their return from the Lynn house. He also dismissed the significance of the sneakers with matching tread patterns found in his possession, asserting they were brand new and that he had immediately disposed of the old pair. While awaiting trial in prison for 3 years, Robert unknowingly shared cells with several informants. In one such conversation, he confessed to meticulously planning the crime and carefully covering his tracks. He mentioned buying the lethal weapon in a remote store without surveillance cameras and drugging his wife with sedatives in tea to prevent her from waking up and noticing his absence. He disposed of the hammer, sneakers, gloves, and clothing in a manner that ensured they would never be found. At the trial, Robert denied everything, and the only evidence against him were the statements from his cellmates and the previously mentioned indirect evidence. As a result, the jury couldn't reach a unanimous verdict, and Robert was released on bail in December 2015. The trial resumed in June 2016 with testimony from another informant who claimed Robert confessed to an obsession with Brenda since she was 13. This led to a re-examination of Brenda, who tearfully admitted that Robert had coerced her into a sexual relationship shortly after she started living with them. Fearing retaliation, she had remained silent about the abuse for years. With these revelations and considering other evidence, Robert was found guilty on all charges. He received 5 life sentences, one for each fatal crime without the possibility of parole. All his subsequent appeals were rejected. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Gabby Doolin. Gabby Doolin was born on December 26, 2007 in the small town of Scottsville, Kentucky, with a population of just over 4,000 people. Scottsville was mostly a farming community where many folks knew each other well, or at least knew someone from each local family. Like in many similar small towns, there weren't a lot of entertainment options in Scottsville. The only major thing for locals was school sports, particularly football. The local school had pretty decent fields for football, baseball, and tennis, where they regularly hosted games and competitions. It became a sort of tradition for locals to attend these activities, especially if their children were involved. Gabby's family was no different. Her parents had 3 kids, 2 sons and a daughter. The oldest boy was on the school's football team, while Gabby herself got into cheerleading in November 2015 when she was 7. Their town was gearing up for the biggest football game of the year, and Gabby's older brother was on the team. However, Gabby was more interested in just hanging out and having fun with other kids than in the game itself. Her parents initially planned to leave Gabby at home with their youngest son under the care of a relative, but Gabby managed to convince them to take her with them. On the evening of November 14th, they headed to the school field. Besides the local crowd, there were also many folks from the other county who came to watch the game and support their team. As soon as their family arrived at the stadium, Gabby spotted her friends and asked her mom if she could go play with them. Her mom agreed, but warned her to stay within the school grounds and stick with the other kids. After that, her mom went to the bleachers and Gabby ran off to her friends. From then on, Gabby dashed back and forth to her mom a few times before going off to play again. At some point, she also came to her dad, who was in an announcement room, and Gabby asked him for some money to buy some snacks at the concession stand before darting away. Sometime later, Gabby's friends ran up to her mom in the bleachers. She glanced at the group and immediately noticed her daughter wasn't among them. The girls asked if she had seen Gabby, and they seemed visibly worried. The woman replied that she hadn't seen her for quite a while. She then asked what was going on, and the girls explained they had decided to play hide and seek. Gabby was supposed to find them, and they hid in the restroom, but time passed, and Gabby never found them. Thinking they had won, the girls left their hiding spot and went to look for her, but Gabby was nowhere to be found. They called her name, checked all the places they had been playing before, but their friend seemed to have vanished into thin air. That's when they thought Gabby might have gone to the bleachers to her mom and ran there. Her mother immediately started to panic and went to her husband, but Gabby wasn't there either. She told him that Gabby was missing, and he rushed to search the area around the stadium. Meanwhile, the mother went to the concession stand where her daughter had wanted to buy some snacks and began searching for her there. On the way, the parents met their friends and informed them about their daughter's disappearance. Hearing that, they joined the worried parents, helping with the search. After scouring the entire area around the stadium and finding no sign of Gabby, the parents went back and made an announcement over the loudspeakers, hoping Gabby would hear it, but that yielded no results either. By that time, there was a break in the game and people were returning to the bleachers. The parents continued asking everyone if they had seen Gabby, and some of them joined in the search as well. They went out again to search the area around the stadium and asked the staff to turn on flashlights around the baseball field, which led to a small forest. The adults walked through it, but still couldn't find her. By this time, about 20 minutes had passed since her disappearance, and the parents decided to call the police. Officers immediately arrived at the school, listened to the parents' and Gabby's friends' accounts, and began searching. The local police department had little experience with such serious cases, as child disappearances rarely occurred in their small town. The officers immediately considered the worst-case scenario that someone had abducted or attacked her. In that case, they faced one problem. The likely perpetrator was probably at the stadium watching the game, which was about to end any minute. So the officers realized they had very little time, and soon people would start going home, including the alleged perpetrator. Eventually, they decided to halt the game and lock down the stadium, keeping everyone inside the building. Officers watched every exit to prevent anyone from slipping away. The police didn't inform people about what was happening to avoid disrupting the search efforts. If everyone knew that the police were considering the possibility that a kidnapper of a 7-year-old girl was in the same vicinity as them, the situation could quickly escalate. Meanwhile, state police arrived at the school and began searching the area. They reached the baseball field and headed into the woods. After some distance into the trees, they stumbled upon a small creek and saw her body in it. They identified her as Gabby and called for an ambulance to take the body to the medical examiner. However, even a visual inspection was enough to suggest that the cause of death was asphyxiation, as there were distinct marks on her neck. Part of her clothing was also missing, leading the police to suspect that the victim had been sexually assaulted. Gabby's mother saw the ambulance near the woods and thought the police had found her daughter who needed medical attention. She rushed there, but the police stopped her as they didn't want the woman to see this horrifying scene. Now that the police were dealing with a murder, they decided to move everyone from the stadium to the school gym. Investigators believed that the killer was likely among them, so they needed to quickly figure out how to identify them. They spoke to Gabby's parents and told them about what likely happened to their daughter. Investigators also asked if they had any suspicions about who could have committed such a heinous act. Perhaps they had noticed someone suspicious, or someone had threatened their family. But Gabby's parents insisted they had no idea who could have done this. Detectives then talked to Gabby's friends and asked if they had seen anything strange that evening. Maybe someone had been watching or following them. But the girls said they couldn't recall anything like that. The police also brought them to the gym and asked them to look carefully at the people present, hoping they might remember something, but it didn't lead to anything. The lead detective continued to believe that the victim's friends might have seen the kidnapper, but either they were afraid to point him out or simply didn't understand the significance of their observations due to their age. He kept asking them to remember every moment of that evening, and finally, one of them mentioned that when they hid from Gabby in the restroom, she saw a man near the door. She remembered almost no details about his appearance except that he was wearing a denim jacket. The police spoke to the cashier who sold tickets to the game, and he also recalled the man with the denim jacket hanging on his arm. He added that this person seemed strange and intoxicated to him. However, they still couldn't identify this man. At that moment, the police gradually interviewed the attendees of the game, and pretty soon, everyone learned why they were being held there. Realizing that they might be in the same room with the killer, people were frightened, especially for their kids, but still cooperated with the police and answered their questions. Investigators cross-referenced the list of names of all the men in the gym with a sex offenders registry, but there were no matches. The police also sent officers to the homes of several such offenders living within close proximity, but they all had solid alibis and none of them were near the school. Meanwhile, officers continued to interview people at the school, and they soon came across some interesting leads. Several individuals told them that during the game they saw a man named Timothy Madden near the women's restroom behaving strangely. He was a local resident, so many people knew him, but according to witnesses, that evening he was acting suspiciously. They also mentioned that he was wearing a denim jacket, the same description provided by one of Gabby's friends who had also seen a man near the restroom. Another witness was a distant relative of Timothy. He mentioned that during the game, Timothy seemed kind of off, and his younger son was playing on the field. But according to the witness, Timothy, who usually was very involved in his son's sports achievements, wasn't even paying attention to the field and seemed lost. Several more witnesses told the police that Timothy's behavior seemed strange to them, prompting investigators to talk to him. It was already nighttime, and they had to release almost everyone from the school. They decided to visit him, but first asked the local sheriff what he thought about Timothy. The sheriff said that he had known him practically all his life and highly doubted that he was capable of such a crime. Timothy had almost no criminal record except for some traffic fines, and he had never been involved in any suspicious situations before. Timothy lived with his wife and 5 children, and the police decided to go talk to him immediately. When they knocked on his door, Timothy opened it, and the officers asked if he knew why they were there. He replied that he had heard about her murder, but had nothing to do with it. Detectives then decided to try one trick and asked him a loaded question. They asked whether he had any explanation for several videos provided by eyewitnesses, showing him talking to Gabby shortly before her murder. There were no videos or witnesses, and the question was designed to prompt the man to reveal some new information if he indeed had something to do with the crime. At first, Timothy said he didn't know, but then he quickly corrected himself. He admitted that he did talk to Gabby that evening near the stadium. According to him, he stepped out to smoke, and at that moment, several girls ran past him. Shortly after, Gabby passed by and asked if he had seen her friends because they were playing hide and seek, and she needed to find them. Timothy pointed her in the right direction, and she ran off. The detectives found it suspicious how quickly Timothy changed his story. Moreover, his account indicated that he spoke to the victim just minutes before her disappearance, and at that time, there were no witnesses outside the stadium, so it gave him the opportunity to commit the crime. The detectives also asked if he would have any explanation if they found his DNA on the victim's body, and Timothy calmly replied no. Finally, they asked him to provide them with a DNA sample and the clothing he wore at the stadium. He agreed to both requests, but as soon as Timothy handed over the clothing to the police, they discovered some stains on it. There was something resembling blood stains on the pants, denim jacket, and even underwear. Detectives asked if he could explain it, and Timothy claimed that they were insane and that it wasn't blood, but some dirt. However, the police thought otherwise, although they needed to wait for the DNA analysis results before they could arrest him. Even though this case was a priority for the lab, it still took several days for the experts to examine all the samples and conduct the analysis. The forensic pathologist soon finished examining the body and confirmed that Gabby's cause of death was manual strangulation. He also confirmed that the victim had been brutally assaulted and extracted a biological sample of the perpetrator, which was sent to the laboratory the day after the murder. Something unexpected happened. The police received an anonymous letter from someone who reported a suspicious individual present at the game. The author wrote down the model of his car and even the license plate, which allowed the investigators to quickly identify the owner of the vehicle. It turned out to be a student living half an hour's drive from Scottsville. The police went there and began questioning him, but the guy claimed he hadn't been to any game and hadn't even heard of the murder. He added that he was at work that evening, and the police found undoubtful confirmation of his alibi. He was crossed off the list of suspects, but the author of the letter was never found. Perhaps someone decided to frame him or play a cruel prank, but the guy was truly innocent. The police soon received another lead. Several people reported strange behavior by a local 16-year-old boy. He told different people that he had been at the game, but then claimed he hadn't attended it. The young man also mentioned seeing girls playing hide and seek. Detectives found out that this boy was Timothy Madden's son, but that wasn't the most surprising revelation. They learned that just 2 weeks before the murder, the boy had become angry with his father and held a knife to his throat, threatening to kill him. Knowing this information, the police headed to speak with him. But there was a problem. They needed the presence of the minor's parents, and his mother refused to provide a DNA sample, leaving the police empty-handed. In Scottsville, a small town where everyone knew each other, rumors spread like wildfire. People heard that the police were looking into the Madden family regarding Gabby's murder, sparking various theories. Some thought one of Madden's troubled older sons could be responsible, while others suspected Madden himself or thought he might be covering for his sons. Gabby's parents also became aware of these rumors, which came as a big shock to them. Gabby's father had known Timothy since 3rd grade and also knew his whole family. Their sons played on the same football team, and their daughters were cheerleading together. Both families were close, even sitting near each other at the game. With all this in mind, Gabby's parents found it hard to believe that anyone from their circle could have been involved in the murder. After the rumors spread around town, something else happened. The eldest son of the Madden family, who was 20 years old, began contacting local officers on social media. He used foul language and threatened them, demanding they leave his family alone. He was immediately arrested for the threats, and the police quickly discovered that there was an active warrant for his arrest in another town. It turned out he was suspected of assaulting a minor girl. They brought him in for questioning, and the young man claimed he was simply frustrated by the accusations against his family. He also said he had nothing to do with the murder, and that he was at his cousin's house in the neighboring town that evening. He agreed to provide his DNA sample, which was also sent to the laboratory on November 20th. 6 days after the murder, Gabby's funeral took place. Hundreds of people came to say goodbye, not only from Scottsville, but also from other towns. People donated a significant amount of money to Gabby's parents to help cover the funeral and farewell ceremony expenses. Meanwhile, the lab completed the DNA analysis and compared the blood and semen samples with Timothy and his son's DNA. The results showed a complete match. The semen found on the victim's body belonged to Timothy Madden, and the blood on his clothes belonged to Gabby. Upon receiving this news, detectives went to the funeral when Gabby's parents were alone and informed them of the discovery of the killer. At the same time, the police officers went to Timothy's house, and he was arrested. As he was being transported from the police station, he shouted to the gathered reporters that he was innocent. Later, he claimed that the blood on his clothes was his own, as he had scratched himself passing by a fence, even though initially, he had told the police that it wasn't blood at all but mud. With the DNA match in hand, the investigators took the case to court, and the prosecution stated they would seek the death penalty. During the trial preparation, Timothy's lawyer insisted his client was innocent and that the origin of the evidence raised serious questions. He argued that during the supposed murder, Timothy was at the stadium filming the game, even though Timothy himself had told the police he saw Gabby around the same time. The lawyer also tried to point out the fact that Gabby's body was found in a creek, but his client's clothes were dry when he returned to the stadium. Timothy's mother, who lived with him, stated that Timothy returned home in clean clothes, didn't look troubled, and behaved as usual. However, the prosecution pointed out that all these arguments crumbled in the face of the fact that the suspect's semen was found on the victim's body. There could be no other explanation for this, and therefore, there was no doubt about Timothy's involvement. According to the police, his account of that evening contains some portion of the truth. He could have indeed stepped out of the stadium during the game and encountered Gabby, who was looking for her friends. She knew Timothy well because he was the father of one of her friends. She might have approached him and asked where the other girls had gone. And that's when he devised a plan. He could have said they ran into the woods behind the baseball field and offered to escort Gabby there. Once they were a few hundred yards away from the school, he could have assaulted and killed her, then returned to the game. The wait for the trial dragged on for years, much to Gabby's family's dismay. They wanted the murderer to be punished, but due to bureaucracy, the case progressed slowly. In 2019, 4 years after the murder, the parties began discussing a possible plea deal. The prosecution offered to drop the death penalty in exchange for a life sentence, with Timothy having to admit his guilt. Gabby's parents agreed to this option because the endless wait for the trial was a heavy burden for them. Moreover, if the trial finally began, they would have to attend hearings for months, essentially reliving their daughter's death all over again. Timothy, who kept insisting on his innocence, eventually agreed and confessed. However, the terms of the deal didn't require him to reveal the details of what he did. He just had to admit his guilt. These terms didn't satisfy Gabby's family because they wanted the perpetrator to fully confess to what he had done to their daughter. During the court hearing, Gabby's father started yelling at Timothy, while the defendant's relatives began shouting at Gabby's family. Eventually, the judge had to take a break and separate them. In the end, Timothy received a life sentence and went to serve it in a maximum security prison. But that's not all. In 2016, a year after Gabby's murder, something else happened involving Timothy Madden. A boy from a neighboring state saw a news report about the crime and recognized Timothy. Several years ago, he and his friend were walking near a mall parking lot when an adult man approached them. He tried to convince the boys to get into his car for a ride, but they found the offer extremely strange and ran away from him. The friend's relative contacted the police, and according to the boy who saw the news report, he was no other than Timothy Madden. However, there was no substantial evidence for this case, so it didn't progress any further. Nevertheless, if Timothy had indeed attempted to abduct 2 boys in another state, it could tell us about his true nature more clearly. Perhaps before Gabby's murder, he had been trying to find other victims but had no success. And on that evening when she approached him near the stadium, he decided to seize the opportunity to satisfy his horrific fantasies.